When I first opened the yellow envelope that contained the journal of Alexei Petrovich, my first thought was that it was a mistake or a joke. It was clearly an old journal, and as I flipped through its pages, I saw that it was filled with a small, cramped handwriting that I didn't recognize at first because of the words filling the spaces between the rows of faded blue lines. You see, the words were in Russian, and I don't know any Russian. But as I paused at random and began studying a page, I felt my hands start to tingle. It was as though a mild current was passing through the journal, causing my fingers to clamp tight around the plastic cover of the book as I realized I wasn't just looking at the words. I was reading them. It was an account of how the strange attacks near Pripyat had grown worse in the last few weeks, and how this man Alexei was considering talking to his uncle in Kiev about them coming to live there, at least for a while. There was more, but it was lost in a growing haze of confusion and fear. These words, all in a language I shouldn't understand, but was somehow able to read, looked like they were written in my handwriting. The journal had come without a return address or any kind of note or explanation. It had just been pushed through my mail slot one day when I was away at work. I asked my neighbors if they had seen anyone leaving me an envelope, but no one had. I actually waited until the next day to try reading the journal again. My delay mainly born out of my fear and reluctance at confirming that something so strange had come into my life. I half hoped when I picked up the journal again that I would be unable to make any sense of it at all. Instead, I began comfortably reading it from the first page. It seems that Alexei had originally started the journal in October of 1984, after receiving the book as a gift from his mother. And like what happens for so many people, the entries started out regular before quickly petering out to nothing as his interest waned. Those first writings covered a period from when he got the journal until December of 1985, and that whole 14 months only amounted to 7 entries, and 2 of which when he was sad and 1 of which when he was drunk. It felt strange and somehow wrong reading this man's inner thoughts and feelings, even when they were put down in such a sparse and perfunctory fashion. It wasn't as though he was bearing his soul that much, but I still felt uneasy when he started morosely talking about disappointing his father, who apparently had named him after an old Russian Tsarevich who was tortured and killed by his own father according to the internet, or how he really liked this girl who had moved to town a few months earlier. It wasn't until January of 1986 that the entries started to grow more frequent, and there seemed to be several reasons for this. For one, he got engaged to that girl that he liked. For another, he got a promotion at his job. He was now the shift supervisor for the number 3 and 4 light water reactors at the power plant. The power plant was named Chernobyl. The third reason he was writing more was to document his growing concerns, not about the impending nuclear accident, of which he knew nothing from his perspective in time, but the strange attacks that had started near Pripyat recently. I could feel his fear and worry as I read his words. 4 people had been killed, and Alexei believed the government was somehow involved. On January 21st, 1985, Alexei writes a long entry describing a story that he heard from a coworker and somehow he saw with his own eyes. Rather than try to paraphrase it, I have reproduced my best translation of this excerpt below. I have never known Luca to be a liar. A cheat at cards, yes, but not dishonest in things that matter. And when he told me about the bowl of Pripyat, I know he wasn't lying. He was too afraid for it to be anything other than the truth. He said, as we all know, that there are certain work tunnels and other areas underneath portions of Pripyat. Some say it is for a bomb shelter, others say it is for certain important people to travel between the town and the plant. Lucas says that it's for secret government things, the chief of which is the bowl of Pripyat. According to Luca, he had an older brother who worked on the plans for where to place the reactor and the nuclear city of Pripyat. The location was chosen because of something that was found there years earlier in a cavern deep below. They called it the Bowl of Pripyat. It was a gigantic metallic bowl that stood as high as a tall man and as wide as two Wartburg 353s were long. It appeared to be empty at first, but over time it was discovered that the bottom would sometimes fill with a strange liquid. You could stir and shift the liquid, but attempting to remove any of it was somehow impossible. And anyone who touched the liquid seemed to go immediately and permanently insane. You would think this would cause people to stay away from the bowl, but as my father used to say, appetite comes with eating. The mystery and danger of the artifact caused it to become a highly prized commodity among those with power. The building of the plant and the city were the perfect cover, as no one would pay attention to a few extra trucks or men coming in and out of the area in the dead of the night. Lucas says that his brother never saw the bowl, but two of his workers had. They had come back and told Lucas' brother strange tales of what was happening in that dark cavern deep in the earth, and it was clear that they were terrified. The next day, his brother received notice that the two men had been transferred elsewhere, and he never heard from them again. The thought of all this was both scary and exciting, but at the time I had no intention of investigating it further. I am no brain, but I know better than to poke a sleeping bear. Still, over the next few weeks, I would find my gaze wandering to a certain patch of woods as I passed by on my way to and from work. Out in a clearing half a kilometer from the road, there was a large concrete pillar that ended in a heavy metal grate. I had always assumed it was some kind of ventilation for the tunnels underneath, but before Lucas' story it had always been a mild curiosity at best. Now it was imbued with a kind of weight that was both attractive and repulsive. Still, I stayed away. When the attack started last month, my mind immediately went to the bowl of Pripyat. This may seem foolish to some. While Pripyat only had small crimes usually, it is not unheard of for someone to be attacked or even killed. But this was different. One of the bodies I've seen myself and the others I've heard tell of it, and the way they were burned and changed, it seems unnatural. People, good and sensible people, started talking about witchcraft and curses, or possibly some kind of nav. But my mind went to the thing that I had come to believe lay beneath us. Tonight, when I was walking home, my eyes went to that patch of forest again. My feet froze to the spot as I saw something looking back at me. It was tall, half again as tall as a large man, and even obscured by the trees and shadow. I could tell that it had an unnatural shape unlike that of any person or animal that I knew. It did not move, but simply watched me as I gathered up the courage to run back home as quickly as I could. Every step I ran I expected to be my last. The thing would catch me from behind and drag me away. They would find my body as they had the others, cracked, charred, and bloated with bones that no longer seemed to fit together right. But nothing happened. I made it back home and have heard no sign of the creature in the hours since. I'm writing this to not only make a record, but to help me decide if I should talk to others about it as well. I do not wish to be thought a fool, but I also do not want others getting hurt if what I know could help. I have talked to some of the other men in the village, and to my surprise, no one laughed. Others have seen and heard things themselves, it seems, and while none of us mentioned the rumors about the bowl or the cavern, we all seem to be in agreement that some kind of monster is plaguing our woods. After some discussion, they've agreed to handle it without notifying any officials. They are forming a hunting party tonight and have asked me to go along. I'm not good with a rifle, but I will still go. I feel this is important and necessary to keep us all safe. There continue to be more entries after this, but they're usually short and typically detail their efforts to hunt this creature. Over the next 2 months, 3 more people are killed and the hunting party is going out every night with no success. Then there's a brief paragraph that says there was a citywide assembly held by government officials. The townsfolk were told to stop all hunting activities, that this was a government matter that was being investigated. Anyone found outside of town at night aside from going to and from work at the plant, would risk arrest and punishment. The next one was the last entry written by Alexei and was clearly hastily done, with the man's normally precise handwriting so much like my own, being replaced with the slanting cursive I use when I'm in a rush. The date of the entry was April 27th, 1986, the day after the Chernobyl disaster. The plant is still burning. They say it started with reactor 4. Everyone is afraid of getting sick from the radiation. Many people want to leave, but others say the radiation goes with the wind and we're safer here. I say that it doesn't matter because the whole thing is a lie. Last week, we started the hunting party again. The military was doing nothing and our people kept dying, so we resolved to act. The night before last, a group of us went on patrol, and for the first time, we found what we had been looking for. I wish now that we hadn't. The creature was standing over the body of a woman, though between her condition and the dark, I couldn't have said who it was, and in the commotion of the past 2 days, I still haven't learned. It looked up at us, and in the glow of our lights, we saw it fully. God, but we saw it too well. It was tall and slender with a long, wide head that trailed off into thick ribbons of twitching flesh that seemed to move on their own, coiling and writhing around its spindly arms and legs like puppet strings. Its torso was a ruined, misshapen mass of bone and meat, with several openings that showed the black, glistening turmoil of its relentlessly churning insides. The worst parts were its eyes and skin, though for wholly different reasons. The skin, I would have to call its skin a kind of yellow, though it was a strangely shining shade that seemed wrong somehow. Just looking at how it glowed in the light made my stomach quiver and something inside my head shift uneasily. As for its eyes, they looked almost human beyond their large size and light purple hue. They were intelligent eyes filled with knowledge and emotion, and it was looking at us with equal parts of curiosity and contempt. We tried to fight it, but as it stepped forward, most of the men dropped their weapons and fell to the ground, jerking like they were in the throes of a fit. I felt my father's shotgun fall from my grasp as I sank to my knees. I wanted to close my eyes to not watch this horrible thing approach and kill us, but I was transfixed. As the men around me grew more violent in their thrashings, I started to hear the first of several dull cracks as they broke their own backs and necks one by one. As for me, the monster stopped in front of me and squatted down, studying me with what might have been mild amusement on a more human face. After a few moments, it snaked out a speckled orange tongue and ran it up my face. As it finished, it spoke a single word. Sila. Either my revulsion and fear overcame its control over me, or the creature chose to release me. Either way, I ran back to the town as quick as I could. Within 2 hours, we were packed and ready to go to Kyiv, invitation from my uncle or not. But that's when the soldiers came, telling us that there had been a fire at the plant and that no one was allowed to leave for the time being. I'm trying to keep up a brave face for my wife-to-be, my beautiful Alina, but I'm terrified. Afraid of the radiation if the fires are real, to be sure, but more afraid of the thing this accident is meant to cover up. The thing that touched me and gave these troubling thoughts and dreams. Because while I've slept little in the last 2 days, what sleep I've had has been strange and troubled, and I find my waking hours invaded by memories and thoughts that are not my own, of a life that is not my own. In that life, I'm an American man named Brian, and it seems to be many years in the future. Young and successful, that life is easier in some ways and harder in others. I have a family there, a job, thoughts and dreams that are both alien to me and undeniably familiar. I cannot say for sure if I'm forgetting Alexei or remembering Brian, but either way it makes me both happy and terrified, as though I delight at the thought of being eradicated and made new. Perhaps it is radiation sickness, but I fear it's something worse. Some hex placed on me by that vile creature in the woods. I fear what its corruption might be doing to me, and God help me, I fear that it might stop. My name is Brian Favors, and I no longer think all of this is some strange coincidence or magical happenstance. I believe everything that Alexei wrote down, and I know that he wasn't crazy. Or if he was, then so am I. Because I'm beginning to remember things too. Things from Alexei's life that were never in the journal. The look of mild surprise and pride on my father's face when I told him of my promotion. The smell of my sweet Alina's hair when I held her close. The feel of that rotten thing's tongue as it raked roughly at my face, and somehow unmoored me and my counterpoint from normal reality and time. I still remember being Brian, but it's harder now. The memories of both men swim around each other like hungry fishes, vying for scraps of my attention. They shove and crowd each other until it's sometimes hard to see either clearly. I should think that I'm just going crazy, but I don't think that I am. And much like Alexei or Brian in the journal, I don't know that I want it to stop. I write all of this with the hope that it'll clear my mind at least somewhat. I post it with the hope that I can receive advice as to what I should do next. I'm strongly considering traveling to Ukraine. Pripyat has become a tourist attraction of all things, and while the trip will be costly, it may be that I can find answers there. But will the answers I find help ease my troubled mind or only give me more questions? I am Alexei Petrovich. I am Brian Favors. I believe that both of these things are true, that I am somehow both men, but I don't believe that is the entire truth. I think the whole truth is that I'm both less and more than these men. As they travel this strange path that has led them to a creaking train ride across the Ukraine in a passenger compartment that smells of cigarette smoke and too many years of use, I feel a phantom third trailing them. Us. Sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, but always there is a terrible constant. The discordant beat of a corrupted heart. I can't see that third face yet, but I can sense it. It's pushing up from some darker depth, carrying the weight of truth and the inertia of inevitability. It terrifies me for many reasons, most of all because I'm beginning to fear that it may be my truest face. It took me 9 hours to fly from New York to Kyiv. Before that, the longest flight that I had ever taken had been to Arizona to visit my cousin when I was 19. This was a wholly different experience. The plane was larger but also older, and while the passenger compartment was only half full, the seats seemed cramped for such a long flight. The blessing was that the trip was relatively quiet, and after a few minutes of listening to the low rumbling hum of the engines, I found myself drifting off to sleep. I had gotten used to the strange dreams by that point, but the dream that I had on that flight was different somehow. In it, I was in a town square, though I couldn't have said where. People were all around me, hurrying to and fro, ordering food from a local stand, clustering up to have conversations here and there before moving on. I was looking around trying to find some point of reference that might trigger some sense of familiarity in either Brian or Alexei's memories, but there was nothing. The architecture of the place was strange, and I saw no signs or engravings that gave any indication of a particular language or nationality. Just a large stone square bordered on all sides by buildings that towered over everything like the upreaching ornate fingers of some subterranean stone god. This was set against a sky that was a deep blue that I would normally associate with twilight, but everything seemed too bright and well-defined for that. I could see far too much, and as the people crowding the square began to turn toward me, I could see the burn scars and keloids that traced fine lines of lightning across everybody's flesh. And they were turning to me now, all of them, first with curiosity and then with joyful recognition. A few of them came towards me, men and women reaching out to touch me as they echoed out greetings to a long-lost friend. At my sides, I felt my coat being tugged as children turned their twisted and charred faces up to me, with gap-toothed smiles and shining eyes wild with excitement. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The crush of people was growing now, and as they pressed closer, The babble of their greetings grew into an undulating wave of sound that I somehow understood even if I felt it tightening my throat and hammering down into the center of my brain. They were welcoming me home. I saw several of the people further back struggling to reach me, rubbing and scratching at their heads in frustration that they were so far back in the swelling biomass that was closing in on me. A needle of new horror pushed through as I saw their hair was coming away in tufts, floating away like dandelion fluff as they went back to pawing their heads with one hand as they reached for me with the other. There was a man in front of me now, and grabbing my lapels and grinning at me as he babbled that same flood of words that were neither English or Russian. He was saying how good it was to have me back at last. I had trouble understanding some of it, but not because I couldn't comprehend the words, whatever language it might be. It was because he was trying to talk as his teeth were falling out. I was awoken from a deep sleep by a concerned-looking stewardess. I had somehow slept the rest of the way to Kyiv and was the last passenger left on the plane. As I pushed my way further up into consciousness, I realized that I was also soaking wet. It was sweat for the most part, though I couldn't say for sure that I hadn't peed on myself a little as well. Feeling a flush of confusion, fear, and embarrassment, I apologized to the stewardess and fumbled my way off the plane. I made the apology in Russian, but I was well past being troubled by such things now. Making my way through the airport, I found a taxi stand and got a ride to the hotel that I had booked prior to my flight. My train for Pripyat did not leave until 6 the next morning, but between jet lag and worry, I got little rest during my stay in the hotel. By 3 a.m., I was already heading to the station in the cold rain that had settled over the city during the night. The train arrived a few minutes early, and so by the time the sun was rising, I was already on my way to Pripyat. I woke with a start. My watch told me that I had been asleep for just over 2 hours, a dreamless sleep that was a blessing after so many bad nights. I still had several more hours to go before I would be in Pripyat, so I started looking around with thoughts of exploring the train for a food cart or a dining car. That's when I saw the faded yellow envelope laying in the seat next to me. I froze like I had just woken up next to a rattlesnake. I knew what it was without opening it. The similarity of the envelope was part of it. That same old, dried-out looking paper that looked like it had been sitting somewhere for decades before being delivered to me. But it was more than that. It was like I could sense or somehow dimly recall that there were more writings inside. Forcing myself to pick up the envelope, I felt the shift of paper inside as I looked around the car for any sign of who might have left this while I slept. The only other passengers were a teenaged couple that were looking at something on the girl's cell phone. Grasping the envelope tightly, I walked back to them, shifting my weight with the subtle sway of the rails as I went. They looked up at the same time, their expression slightly frightened and wary as I asked them if they had seen anybody leave me the envelope. The boy shook his head while the girl muttered no. They had not seen anything, and then they both went back to studying her phone. I wanted to ask more, but I could tell that they were ignoring me out of some sort of anxiety and not rudeness. And I didn't want to worry them more by being the strange man that kept bugging them with odd questions. So I reluctantly went back to my seat and opened up the envelope. I recognized her handwriting right away. The tone, however, was much different this time. It was describing events that took place several days after the last entry from Alexei, and this time the writer identified himself as Brian. Much like me, he had mixed memories of both men, and much like me, he found himself increasingly unable to distinguish one from the other as his nightmares grew more real and vivid. Unlike me, he had had to watch as some of our friends were killed. Shortly after Alexei's last entry, military came into the town and began dividing people into groups. The first divide was between people that worked at the plant and those that didn't. Brian, still appearing to be Alexei to everyone else, was placed in the plant worker group. This group was then divided into those that had participated in hunting parties for the monster, or otherwise made official reports of seeing strange things, and those that hadn't. This wasn't said, of course, but Brian remembered enough of Alexei's life to figure it out quickly. Alexei and the rest of his group were interviewed extensively about what they had done, seen, and heard. The interviews were conducted in what had been the mayor's house, but it had now been turned into a military post of some sort since the supposed meltdown had begun. Alexei, sensing the direction that this was all going, minimized his knowledge and participation in the hunting parties and denied ever seeing or hearing anything strange himself. He was allowed to return home and see Alina. He described the strange love that he felt for this girl that he had just met and the desperate fear growing in him that she needed to get away as soon as she could, even if it meant sneaking past the quarantine. She refused to leave him behind, however, and he worried that if he went with her, it would just guarantee that they would get caught, as he had every idea that they weren't done with him yet. He was right. The next morning, they loaded him along with 24 others into a bus and began heading toward the plant. When some of his coworkers had asked about the radiation, one of the guards just chuckled, telling them that there was nothing to worry about. Brian wanted to ask more questions. How could the radiation not be a problem? How could it be safe to go up there at all if the plant was still burning? But they had rifles and they didn't want to test their good humor. Besides, he had realized something as they were slowing to a stop at the gate of the plant. None of the guards were wearing radiation protection either. The bus parked underground in Staff Lot B. We were all taken out of the bus and made to line up as a severe-looking officer had approached. He said that we had been chosen for a very important task, that all of the details of the reactor accident had not been made public, and in fact, large portions of the plant were still operational. People had been brought in to maintain the plant temporarily, but it was a short-term solution to a long-term problem. They now needed us to go back to work for the next few weeks until a more permanent resolution was found. There were so many confused looks and fearful murmurs at this. What the man was saying made little sense. If there truly had been a meltdown at Reactor 4, the proper protocols were to evacuate, stop any outlying fires or electrical issues from spreading to the core cooling systems of the other reactors, and then look at further containing and extinguishing the fire in Reactor 4. There would be no talk of running the other reactors normally at this point, or having more than a handful of crew needed to keep the emergency systems running, so there was no further problems during the full shutdown. But I recognized many of the men they had brought because they were not only my friends and neighbors, but workers that had supervised on Reactor 4. At first, I thought they were just going to have them help on one of the other reactors, but as we began dividing up, I saw they were being told to report to their normal stations, without any special instructions or suits, not even respirators or potassium iodide tablets. When they gathered the few of us left, the supervisors together, but now was the time for action and loyalty, and not questions or fear. We all nodded and held our tongues as we made our way into the plant. And as we went deeper, I kept waiting for that smell of smoke, the heat of fire, or worse yet, the metallic tang on my tongue that I've heard comes from radiation poisoning. But there was nothing. No signs of destruction or even disarray. I went through my rounds like I normally would, checking with every station, and everything seemed to be in order. Not only in order, but still running. There had been no shutdown of Reactor 4. As far as I could tell, the control rods were still in their normal position, and there were no signs of a meltdown or any other incident. After a couple of hours, I snuck away long enough to look at some of the readings for the past few days, but the logs for the past week were all gone. Aside from confirming my suspicions that none of this was what it seemed, it also troubled me for another reason. If they were going to all this trouble for secrecy, would they ever actually let us go? The answer seemed dreadfully apparent, and over the next few days it only became more so. We weren't allowed to go back to Pripyat or leave the plant at all. It was justified as safety measures and security precautions. But by the third day, several of the men had had enough. Many of us gathered in the dining hall, and 3 of the most vocal dissenters demanded that we all be released at once. After a brief consultation of who they were and how critical they were to the running of the plant, 2 of the 3 were shot dead in front of us. The third, a nuclear engineer named Dusen, was taken away in handcuffs and I never saw him again. It was that evening as I lay in my cot during my 3-hour shift break that I realized what I must do. When I heard tales of the tunnels beneath the plant in Pripyat, I always wondered where they might be hidden. When Luca told me of the bowl of Pripyat, my mind had turned to it again, but this time backed by years of experience working at the plant and familiarizing myself with much of its layout. I never had access to all areas, but I knew of only a few places that were likely spots for such a tunnel to exist. I felt a rumble of nervous fear at the idea of trying to escape and being caught, but it was far outweighed by my terror at what might be happening to Alina every hour that I was trapped there. I had found a forgotten letter opener the day before and taken to carrying it in my pocket just in case I needed a makeshift weapon. Tapping my leg to ensure that it was still there, I crept out into the hall and began making my way down to the lower levels. I had assumed that I would encounter guards or some kind of resistance on those lower levels, particularly if there were a tunnel that needed to be kept secret. But oddly, there were none. Normally, this would have cemented my fears that I was on a fool's errand. But I had been gripped by this strange certainty that the tunnel existed and I was on the path to it. It was in one of the sub-basements that I found a heavy metal door standing open. I saw no one, but there were splashes of fresh blood on the concrete floor nearby, which might have explained the lack of any guards. My breath came in burning gasps as I approached the door. But what choice did I have? I had to at least try. Pulling the door open further, I saw it led to a well-lit concrete tunnel that moved at a slight downward slope for several hundred feet before its path curved out of view. I saw no signs of guards or the monstrous thing that I had encountered in the woods. In fact, other than a few more splatters of blood inside the tunnel itself, it looked relatively benign. Glancing behind me a final time, I stepped into the tunnel and started making my way down. I walked for 10 minutes before the tunnel started to change. I was deeper now, to be sure, but the rock was different here too. Darker and with an oily sheen that I didn't like. There were still lights strung along as I went, but I found myself trying to avoid looking around any more than I had to. That's why when I rounded the next corner, I almost ran into a massive steel door. Like the last, this one was open. Pushing it further, I gazed into a large, massive chamber that was lit by large fire braziers rather than the electric lights from the tunnel. In fact, it almost felt as though the light from the tunnel barely reached the chamber at all. And pools of shadow lay across much of the large cave, with jagged rock formations stabbing down from the darkness like the closing maw of a wolf. Aside from the flames, the only real source of light came from what lay in the middle of them. The bowl of Pripyat was much as Luca had described, or at least as I had pictured it. Despite my desperate need to get home, I found myself drawn to it in the silvery light that seemed to be pulsing from inside like the beating of a heart. It looked to be made of some kind of metal, but it was then that the guard attacked me. He was already dying, but whatever had gotten his comrades hadn't finished him off completely. Whether he thought I was his attacker or he was just determined to do his duty to the end, he managed to drive a knife deep into my side. He was talking nonsense as he pushed his weight against me. He said, "Stay away from the mirror." I fell against the side of the bowl, rolling my body away from him with enough force that he let go of the knife. Trying to fight off the cold shock that I felt filling the right side of my body, I dug for the letter opener. Once out, I held it up to fend off any further attack, but it wasn't necessary. The guard was already on the ground, his body contorting unnaturally as his bones snapped. The monster was here. I gripped the letter opener tighter, peering into the darkness as I felt my vision beginning to dim. My thoughts were growing stranger and more desperate as I felt my life leaving my body. I knew better than to remove the knife, but I had no way to stem the flow of blood from around the blade. I would never make it to Pripyat, never be able to help my sweet Alina. I would die here, alone in the dark with this dead man and the terrible monster that had caused all of this calamity. Except had it? And even if it had, hadn't it just helped me at least inadvertently? And knowing how pointless it would likely be, I found myself calling out into the darkness, asking the monster to help me get home to my Alina. There was no response, though I felt as though I could sense it out in the dark, watching me as I clung to the bowl for support. In another moment, I would be too weak to even stand, and then it would be all over. Turning away from the unhelpful darkness, I found myself staring into the glowing, silvery liquid in the bottom of the bowl. I had the distant thought that either the bowl wasn't quite as tall as Luca had said, or that it had gotten taller. I almost laughed at the idea, and then I saw my reflection in the liquid. I looked strange. Something wasn't right. In my adult state, I found myself suddenly obsessed with seeing my reflection closer, trying to figure out what exactly had changed about me, using strength that I shouldn't have had. I pulled myself up on the lip of the bowl. The next moment, I was overbalanced and plunging face first into the shining depths that lay at its center. But I didn't hit the bottom or die from whatever that liquid might be. I may have gone mad, however, for I suddenly found myself lying on thick carpet in a darkened room. I barely had time to sit up when the lights of the twin crystal chandeliers blazed to life overhead, and I saw there was a painfully thin woman wearing a business suit and a serious expression walking toward me from the edge of the room. She came within a few feet before stopping and giving what I supposed was her version of a warm smile. Looking down at me, she spoke English with a strange accent that I didn't recognize. I understood the words well enough, though they made little sense to me at the time. "Welcome to the Imago Hotel, Alexei. I hope you enjoy your stay." The sensation of reading the journal of my twin self, this other mixture of Brian and Alexei, was strange. It reminded me of finding something that I had written years earlier. It was unfamiliar until I read it, and then I remembered it again, as I sat on the train trundling away from Kiev toward Pripyat. I remembered these events from this other life as I read them, and it shook me to my core. The smell of fear and uncertainty as we rode the bus up to the reactor, the terror of watching some of our coworkers be killed, the growing certainty that we would never be allowed to leave the plants once they were finished with us because we knew too much, the cold smell of the tunnel that led down deep into the earth where the bowl lay waiting in its cave like a coiled subterranean serpent, the sound of the guard's body being crumpled up like a piece of paper by the creature that lay in the shadows, apparently in an attempt to save Brian's life. The touch of the liquid as I fell over the lip into the bottom of the bowl, and then nothing. As soon as this other me had passed into the Imago Hotel, I had no further memories of what happened, even when I reread passages several times. The remainder of the account was relatively brief, and the brief postscript only made my sense of unease grow stronger as I put the pages back into the envelope. We were now nearing Pripyat and the end of my journey, but I feel I should share with you that last account by the version of me that fell through the bowl of Pripyat into that strange hotel ballroom. It may make the rest more understandable in some ways. The Imago Hotel, as I came to learn, was a very exclusive and very secluded hotel in the western part of America. I searched the memories of both Alexei and Brian, but neither had ever heard of it before. Then again, only a select few were ever allowed entry. The hotel was old and massive, with an air of elegance and wealth and history that was both wonderful and a little terrifying at the same time. Everything was in its place and everything was beautiful, but too much so, if that makes sense. The spotless marble floors, the polished glow of the wood walls, and the artfully decorated coffered ceilings far overhead almost gave it the solemnity of a church, though a church for some unknown and alien god unseen in the minds of most. I'm sure this all sounds quite melodramatic, and I ask your forgiveness on that point. I know that I'll fail in describing this place properly, but I feel that I must try. And it should be noted that the oddness of the hotel only began with the decor. Far stranger were those that inhabited it. After I found myself in one of the smaller ballrooms of the hotel, I was greeted by the owner herself, Angelica Lamarck. She was a tall, very thin woman with bright, intelligent eyes and a kind of magnetism that made it easy to get lost in her voice when she was talking to you. If I hadn't already been so muddled from my journey through the bowl and my growing blood loss, I might have drowned in the soft roll of her words and the deep, raspy warmth with which she intoned them. But the pain where the knife had pierced me demanded attention, both from me and from a doctor. Showing remarkable strength, Angelica picked me up with a seemingly little effort and carried me out of the ballroom and across a brightly lit lobby. As we moved into the open, several other men and women came walking up, their faces interested but unconcerned. She told 2 of them to get a wheelchair while directing a third to wake the doctor and prepare the clinic for their new guest. Even through the fog slowly filling my brain, I felt a stab of worry about this. What were they going to do to me in this strange place? How had I gotten here and what did they mean to do? And then I was gently sat in the chair and Angelica wheeled me nimbly down several halls into a large space that wouldn't look out of place at the nicest hospitals in Moscow or America. An older man with a mustache stepped forward and introduced himself as Dr. Graham, before easing me out of the chair and onto a nearby metal table. I felt myself tensing again, but he patted my shoulder comfortably. He told me he understood this was all very strange, but it would make more sense in time. For now they had to make sure that I lived long enough that I got the chance to see everything. 3 days later and I was back on my feet. Angelica had come by several times to check in on me, but otherwise I had been left to my own devices. I mainly slept, but I also read sometimes as well. I had grown used to my shared and overlapping memories, but I was still amazed that I was able to read and think in both English and Russian. While I was still worried about Alina and the others, it all seemed strangely distant now, and by the time that I had been there a week, I hardly thought of them at all. "It's the hotel," Angelica told me one day when I asked her why I wasn't more scared or worried. I made sure I prefaced it with telling her how much I appreciated her saving my life, but she just nodded and waved it all away with a laugh as she explained. "Not that you shouldn't be happy to be alive and appreciative that we were here to help, but much of your peace is coming from this place. It is very special. My family has always been very fortunate. We live a very long time and we tend to live very well. But out of all my kin, I was the one blessed with finding Mirror Valley. That's what the locals used to call it because of the small, still lake that lies at the valley's center. It's perfectly round, perfectly calm. It was also the subject of many superstitions and folktales, as geographic oddities often are. Except this time, this time some of the tales were true. I built my hotel on top of that lake more than 100 years ago, both to be close to its untapped potential and to channel it. This hotel is my temple and my tuning fork, if you'll pardon the clumsy alliteration, as it serves as both a monument to my system of belief and the means by which I exert my will in this world and others. She paused here, waiting for me to ask the implied question so that she could have the satisfaction of answering it. If I wasn't enraptured by the odd effect of her voice, I might have found it off-putting. But as it was, I just gave her the response that she desired. "Others?" She smiled with the practiced graciousness of someone used to getting what she wanted. "Other worlds, so many other worlds." Even in my partial stupor, I had enough sense to wonder why she would tell me all of this. I was beyond questioning the reality of incredible things at this point, but I was troubled by her willingness to share such things with a stranger. Unless, "You don't plan on letting me leave, do you?" Her smile widened, reminding me of an old gray wolf that used to prowl around my parents' farm when I was a boy. My father would hunt it, but always without success. And I remember one time it stood watching us from the edge of the woods, regarding us with a breed of indifferent contempt as my father fruitlessly rushed inside for his rifle. Thinking back on it now, I think that wolf was smiling, perhaps even laughing at us. It understood a terrible truth that we were still learning. You will never beat me. I will come when you don't expect it and will always know your tricks better than you know yourself. You should give up. You should give up. You should. Well, I plan on making it so that you don't want to leave. Though I suppose that's a thin distinction to you at this point. I want you to stay and make this place your home. I want your help exploring all the many places that I've found and will find. The workers I have here, they lack the spark I need. But you, I think you could be something very special. The journal entry ended there except for a short postscript that simply said, when you see her, go with her. I wasn't sure who her was, but the idea that it might be Angelica Lamarck filled my stomach with a queasy, fluttering fear. And while I didn't recall those last passages that I had read from my own past memory, I did feel that I was sharing some of the brain fog that he had described. I have heard that some animals, when heading toward their own death and destruction, enter into an almost euphoric state of calm. The lemming tumbling towards the rocks, the mantis feeling the pressure of its deadly lover's embrace. Did they feel fear, or a sense of rightness? A conviction that they weren't being obliterated by bad luck or the ill will of others, but were instead playing their part in the grand design of some larger plan. I stumbled from the train station toward the taxi stand, but was only halfway across the lot when I saw the older woman standing near the taxis watching me. My breath caught in my chest at the sight of her. She was in her 50s now, but still so beautiful that it made my heart hurt. My Elena here after all this time. I couldn't say if my fog lifted or just crystallized, but I felt clear-headed and strong as I rushed toward her, sweeping her up into a fierce hug. She laughed at that, but I could feel tension in her too. So after a moment, I released her and stepped back. I'm sorry, but it is you, isn't it? She nodded, tears shining in her eyes as she smiled. It is. I was on the train as well, but I wanted you to have time to read the pages before we met. We want you to understand as much as you can before you hear the last of it. Did you read it all? I frowned. I did, but I don't know what any of it means. My God, I must be going crazy. I remember loving you so much, but I also remember my other life in America. How is any of this possible? Alina reached out and touched my cheek tenderly, her joy seeming to give way to an abiding sadness. It is better for him to explain it to you. It is not my story to tell. Come, I have a car nearby. We traveled the few miles to the town of Pripyat, and even at a distance, I was amazed by the juxtaposition of the town's ruins with the trappings of tourism. Buses, hostels, and even a few spots selling snacks and souvenirs. I felt like I was watching a party in a graveyard. I guess in some ways, that's exactly what it was. But soon enough, we were turning away from the town and heading into the forest between Pripyat and the plant. I could already see security blocking the way a few hundred yards ahead, but before long, Alina was pulling down into the trees with the sure-footedness of a long-developed habit. She gave me a quick smile and said that we had to walk from there so the car wouldn't get stuck. Before long, we were in a clearing, and in the center of the clearing was the ventilation pipe that I had written about. I felt only dim surprise when Alina went to it and opened it easily. Within moments, without any words between us, I was following my lost love down into the dark. The tunnel was nearly pitch black, but when she turned on a flashlight, I saw that it was also surprisingly clean and ordinary looking. I wanted to ask so many questions, but something held my tongue. I felt as though I was in a dream and the wrong word or action might break the spell. And although I was afraid of what was to come, I was more afraid of waking back up in my old life with all that had occurred having been wiped away. I didn't know if that made me crazy or a fool, and frankly I didn't care. I knew the path I was on was the right path, the important path. and I was going to see it through. Just then, the monster stepped out onto that path. It was just as the journal described, just as I had remembered it. Tall and glistening yellow, with flesh stretched painfully and filled with gaping holes that showed the black meat restlessly stirring in its chest. And its eyes, its terrible purple eyes. I recognized those eyes, and that recognition filled me with a kind of terror that I had never known before. Perhaps it was similar to the terrible realization of the lemming, or the man as he plummets to his death. There are some things you can't take back. I wanted to take it all back as I looked into those eyes, those familiar eyes, and then the monster spoke with a deep voice that was coarse but intelligent.
Hello, Brian. Or do you prefer Alexei? I have so little use for names now. It's hard for me to decide.
I swallowed, my fear of the monster having been wholly subsumed by what the monster seemed to represent. The inevitability of my own doomed past and future. You're me, aren't you? The thing made a rough, rasping noise that might have been a laugh.
You're smarter than I am, or is that even possible? I don't know. I know too much and too little now, I suppose.
It swung its head up and down in an approximation of a nod.
But yes, I am you and you are me, after a fashion.
I took a step forward, needing to know it all now, needing it to be over. I felt like a man who wanted to vomit just so the pain and pressure would stop building, even if only for a short while. How is any of this true? And then the monster told me.
Angelica called them delves, deep excursions into the multitude of worlds that make up what she calls the Incarnata. I spent over a decade conducting delves for her, which I soon learned largely meant scouting out places that she could easily exploit in some fashion. It was dangerous and terrifying work, at least at first, but I was almost fully under her spell by that point, and ashamed as I am to admit it, I enjoyed much of the work even from the start. The Incarnata is a place formed from ideas and beliefs and shaped by will and desire. The thousands or millions of worlds that live within it are all interconnected and constantly changing with the ever-shifting tides of its inhabitants' individual and collective thoughts and passions. It literally is in many ways a dreamland, though it would be a mistake to think that it was overly chaotic or lacking in substance. To the contrary, what happens there is very real, and much of that power can and does bleed over into our own world as well. It is also a very dangerous place, particularly for visitors. Angelica is unique in that, for whatever reason, nothing touches her there for good or ill. For all her candidness with me on many matters, she never liked talking about that particular topic. Either because she didn't know herself why nothing could affect her, or because she was protective of her greatest strength. Because Angelica, in her own calculating way, is a great conqueror. Between her immunity and most opposition and Incarnata and her ability to bend others to her will, she has subjugated several worlds there and enslaved entire groups. She sees them all as monsters, you see, as lesser than her and thus only worth whatever use they have for her greater design. For many years, I was a part of that design. The risk of Angelica and Incarnata is typically minimal, but her time is limited and her reputation precedes her there. It was much easier to send me in her stead, first as an explorer and then a spy, and eventually as a monster to frighten the other monsters. For I don't have any immunity to that place, and there are many places there that can infect you, change you. And then there's the fact that you can alter yourself there as well. The more betrayals and atrocities that I participated in, the more I hated myself and what I was becoming. But I never stopped, never refused to do my part for my queen. And with each trip I would come back more warped and twisted in mind, body, and soul, growing closer to the abomination that you see before you now. My grandmother, our grandmother, always used to say, if you run with wolves, you learn to howl. I thought of that many times as I reflected on what I had become. A creature that was very powerful and knowledgeable, but also very cruel and feared even among fearsome beings. It was during one of these periods of introspection and self-loathing that I began to formulate a plan. I couldn't kill myself. Angelica had too strong a hold on me for that. But perhaps I could kill an earlier version of myself. Time and some aspects of reality had become much more fluid and exploitable for me over the years. And I knew it was possible for me to go back along my own timeline to before I found the bowl. So that is exactly what I did. In the original timeline of events, I never saw the monster in the woods. The Killians and such happened, as well as the fake meltdown to cover up the deaths. But they were all related to something else that had escaped the hotel through the bowl, not me coming back to kill my earlier self. When I originally fell into the bowl, it was trying to get me away from the guard that had stabbed me, but without any intervention from my monstrous future self. When I came back to 1986, I found my younger self with a hunting party, and I killed those men who I had once known and called friends, without any hesitation or pity. The only effect their deaths had upon me was to further demonstrate what a despicable monster I had become. So I approached the younger Alexei with every intention of ending his life before he could become the monster that I am. But then I found that I couldn't. Whatever magic Angelica has, it has found its way deep into my bones. So deep, in fact, that I couldn't do harm to my past self any more than I could to my own body. I had a moment of panic, but I've grown clever in my own terrible way, and I quickly saw another solution. When I licked Alexei, I split him in two. Half would stay as he was, following the unassailable path that would lead to a version of me. The other half would become Brian Favors, an infant orphan soon found in another part of the world. My hope at the time was that at the very least, I would be sparing at least a portion of my soul from rotting under Angelica's gaze. And it worked, after a fashion. I watched the part of me that was still in Pripyat over the next few days, even protecting him from the guard at the end. I would like to say that was due to Angelica's bewitchment, but I don't know that it was. Even after all my efforts to right my wrongs, I'm fearful and selfish, and I know that I become far more like Angelica than I care to admit. But at least there was you. You were living a good life and seemed to be a good person the few times that I got to check up on you. But I had to be careful. You were my one secret from Angelica for the longest time. And then I had another. A few years ago, I had managed to trick her, trap her deep within one of the darkest recesses of Incarnata. It freed me and many others from being under her will, and allowed me to finally leave the hotel once and for all. I returned here to the only true home that I had ever known. In the years since the Chernobyl plant incident, the bowl isn't visited as much anymore. It is guarded but never studied or approached more than a handful of times a year. Most of the tunnels connecting its cave to the outside world have been filled with cement, and the few places like this that are left are largely forgotten by the outside world. I am part of the reason for the forgetting. I am not seen unless I mean to be seen, and I have made it so people do not remember the bowl much, if at all. My original plan was to guard the bowl myself and stay in exile until this unnatural form had finally died. And then one day, I heard Alina praying. She had been evacuated back in 1986, and once the area had been cleared for visitors again, she began making yearly trips back to Pripyat, in part to visit all that had been lost, in part to look for me, despite what logic her worried family kept telling her. It was on one of these trips that she found her way to the strange ventilation pipe in the clearing above us. She spoke to it like it was my gravestone, telling it how much she still loved me, but she needed to accept that I was gone and finally move on. The miracle of hearing her voice joined with my terror at her never coming back, and before I had time to reconsider, I showed myself. It was a terrible ordeal, but not in the way that I had anticipated. For she had found my first journal, and when I changed the past, I had changed the journal as well. So now she remembered reading about how I had encountered the monster and what it looked like. And rather than running from me in fear, she railed against me, demanding to know what I had done with Alexei. It was only when she stopped to look into my eyes and hear me speak that she realized the horrible truth. Somehow, through some miraculous love that I don't deserve, she's come back to me frequently in the years since. I was more than content with the time that she could give, and for a time I thought to live out this part of my life in peaceful solitude, while comforted by the life that you had so far away from all this death and sorrow. But then I began to feel the troubled stirring in the depths of my bones. She's growing stronger again somehow, in the depths of Incarnata. I don't know if she's free yet, but if not, it won't be long. And despite my best intentions and worst fears, I won't be able to resist your call when it comes. That is why I had Elena send you my journal. That is why I had her deliver my account of my introduction to Angelica in the Amago Hotel. I needed you to remember more, to understand more, so you will not refuse what I have to ask of you.
I swallowed, my tongue thick and numb in my mouth. I understood now and even believed, and I wasn't sure what I was willing to accept. I was created as an offshoot of a Russian guy by the reality-warping future monster version of the same man. What the hell? Not knowing what to say, I just nodded. The monster swallowed, its slick, bulging gorge rising and falling twice as it struggled to meet my gaze. Its next words were almost too quiet to hear.
I need you to go with me to the bowl. It is empty now, so there's no risk of going to the hotel or anywhere else. But it is the only place close by where I think this will work. Once we're inside and with my help, I need you to consume me. Literally eat my body from start to finish. It will not be as long or as daunting a task as you might think. I can ease the work of it greatly, at least until it lasts. But it is the only way I can fathom that might finally bring an end to me while also saving you and Alina.
I shook my head. What? How does that make any sense? How is me eating you going to help anything? Why can't I just stab or shoot you or something? Its large eyes grew sadder, and I knew it hated what it was asking of me. I felt a pang of sympathy for it. I think this part of Alexei was very well practiced in hating itself.
It isn't an act of killing, it's an act of consuming, absorbing. I will still be in you after a fashion, but this identity, this will, all of that will be ended. You can go on living your life and making your own choices, no longer bound to my mistakes or Angelica.
I tried to find a kind way to ask the next part, but any nuance has fled from me somewhere between Kiev and Pripyat. Will I become a monster like you? Another rough laugh.
No, at least I don't think so. But if you learn any lesson from this, let it be this one. I am a monster because what I've done let happen, not because of how I appear. Some of the best and brightest souls that I've ever met were in Incarnata, and yet many would call that place a land of terror and monsters. As for what you will become, like all of us, that is ultimately up to you.
The bowl was smaller than I remembered, though perhaps that was merely because I was sharing it now. Alina had said her tearful goodbyes to my other self before it climbed into the bowl beside me, and she called to me that she would be waiting outside near the car when I was finished. I wanted to ask her to stay, but I knew it was a selfish impulse, and so I just told her to be careful as she went. I looked into those eyes one last time and asked if he was sure this is what he wanted. He said it was, and reaching down he plucked off a piece of his flesh as though it were a wad of cotton candy. He offered it to me and I ate it down with little trouble. I remembered as a kid going to a science museum in Kentucky. They had a machine that pumped out a thick fog, and before the teacher came and stopped me, I stood near it and bit at the mist that came pouring out. That was what this was like, eating something that was next door to nothing. At the end, all was left was a small and hardened coal that I think had once been his heart. This part had more weight and texture, and as I swallowed down the last of it, I gagged a little at the greasy residue that it left behind. I waited for a second, tensing for some change, but felt none. All things considered, I actually felt pretty good. Not wanting to press my luck, I scrabbled out of the bowl of Pripyat and went up to find Alina waiting. As we traveled away from that doomed town, I found myself feeling a sense of hope that I hadn't in some time. I worried about what he had said about Angelica returning, about what future dangers the bowl might pose. But those were concerns for another time, perhaps for other people. For now, I was safe and with the woman that I had just met and had loved for 2 lifetimes. Taking her hand as she drove us through the dark, I found that was enough.
The year was 2001. The transmission came in perfect English and garbled not by mispronunciation but static. A man's voice implored our agency and in fact all space agencies to send their best and brightest up into space. They implored us to travel out and meet them at the farthest reach of the farthest galaxy known to us. And the message came along with coordinates, setting the messenger's location at the edge of the known universe. It seemed by any stretch of the sane imagination to be a hoax, but our best minds and our finest technology returned the same results time and time again. The message was indeed transmitted to our station from deep space. It was not an Earth-originating communication. Looking back now, I realized NASA's brightest minds were not conducting countless tests for the sake of verifying the transmission's authenticity, but because they were hoping that it would be proven inauthentic. We were terrified, and that was the plain and simple truth of it. I was not but a lowly engineer, privy only to the barest information pertaining to the transmission, and I was terrified too. The thought of a transmission spoken in fluent and perfectly enunciated English, as if from a human rather than an alien tongue, it filled my gut with dread. In science fiction, such a notion was exciting, but the reality of this transmission was quite the opposite. It raised questions, in a list seemingly unending as scientists and politicians and various global experts in various fields all lent their minds to the task at hand. There was no doubt that we were going to answer the call, of course, and investigate the coordinates given to us. But would we send out a team of humans, as our mysterious messenger had requested? We knew nothing about the intentions of the individual or the collective behind the message. Their message had been left vague and intentionally so, which rang alarms for many. Dr. Leslie Prescott headed what came to be known as the Apollo 98 project, which would send a moderately large team of scientists on one of humanity's most cutting-edge vessels out to the given coordinates in order to meet with the messenger. Those individuals would have to be volunteers, given no assurances could be made about the safety of the contact with this messenger, but they would be hailed as heroes in this monumental new chapter in humanity's history: contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence. I signed up for the mission. What did I have to tie me to Earth as a young man of 21 years old, orphaned in his youth and with no girlfriend, real friends, or living relatives? This was my chance to be remembered. Otherwise, I would have died alone a few decades down the line, my name dying in a flash. It was a morbid reason to sign up for the mission, but Dr. Prescott's propaganda had worked a charm on me. I wanted to be part of humanity's legacy. I wanted to be remembered. And being one of the 57 crew members of the Apollo 98 vessel, I would be remembered forever, and by far more people than would have ever remembered me if I would stayed on Earth, slaving away in a mid-level engineering role at NASA. Alongside training us for the mission, NASA began constructing its ship.
working with an independent contractor known as Dozen Minus, which for decades had been developing technologies, if for not centuries, ahead of modern science. I aided those engineers in the construction of this gargantuan vessel, using technology beyond any public conceptions of what was feasible with 21st century science. But then that was the benefit of working alongside Dozen Minus, this unofficial and classified agency knowledgeable and practiced in going beyond the beyond, as they like to say. I actually became rather close to Dr. Prescott and many of the other engineers over the coming years. By 2011, 10 years deep into the mission, I started to question whether I wanted to go on the mission at all. I had people that I cared about, but then the majority of those people were planning on launching themselves into space, far from Earth, so I stuck the course. I felt that I had no other choice. My name was on the Apollo 98 list. It would have reflected poorly on me to pull out at that late stage. I wasn't some nobody anymore. I was Michael Thompson, a senior engineer, preparing for the scheduled 2014 voyage to outermost space of our feebly earthly knowledge on a vessel known as Apollo 98. Yet despite my involvement in the project, I felt that I knew far too little about its inner workings. That was, at least in some part, the source of my growing unease about partaking. I had worked on significant parts of the engineering, yet I knew next to nothing of the engines being developed for the Apollo 98 craft, and I often scoffed in disbelief at the claims of the seemingly fictional speed of travel that the 98 was supposed to achieve. It was to be driven by engines akin to warp drives, traveling at a speed achievable only in literature and films, but they were telling me that it was real, all possible, and I would see for myself in 3 years. But that wasn't the only source of anxiety. It was the irrational source of anxiety, I suppose. Much like the general unknown after all, we still knew nothing of the intentions of our messenger, and they had never sent another transmission. And that was enough to fill one with deep fear. But the churn in my stomach came from elsewhere. It came from a less rational source, or so I told myself. I felt as we spent the next few years working and preparing for the mission that we were missing something. In truth, I felt watched, and that was an absurdity that I didn't share with my colleagues. That was the fear based in no grounded reason nor rationality. It wasn't a sense of being observed keenly by NASA superiors from concealed cameras, but by the sort of make-believe ghost or monster of a children's story. My fear felt as make-believe as the warp drives powering the Apollo 98. And did I believe perhaps in little green men watching me from the shadows? The thought made me chuckle. Whenever I managed for a fleeting moment to settle my gut and convince myself that it was all in my head. But the inexplicable terror always returned. Maybe there was an otherworldly being watching me. The rumors were that aliens had contacted us in the first place. Who or what else could it have been, speaking to us in perfect English via that transmission? Whatever the answer, it was something alien, in the sense that the messenger had spoken to us from somewhere light years away from Earth. But I came to realize, as the months ran down towards the launch date in August of 2014, that my idea of little green men was a comforting fantasy that I told myself. It was something ludicrous to give myself a good chortle, and help perhaps to allay my growing terror, because the truth of it was that I knew somewhere deep within that whisked-up belly of mine that I was being watched by something far worse, and far more of a threat than the humorous extraterrestrials of fictional media. It was a few weeks before launch that the feeling became more concrete. I woke at the dead of night in a sweat, staring in the dark of my bunk bed in the Apollo 98 vessel. We had been working and living in the craft, preparing for its launch, and that haunting sensation of some other presence had only worsened during that time. But this particular night was the beginning of a new chapter, in which I realized I wasn't insane after all. There were thoughts in my head that weren't my own. Intrusive thoughts, I was told by a psychiatrist that I saw in the morning. So I did my research on what those were. I had heard about them before, and reading about that confirmed roughly what I thought them to be. My chest tightened. These didn't feel like those. For one, it seemed strange for a man at 34 years of age to suddenly develop a mental health issue that typically starts in people in their early formative years. I had never had an intrusive thought before. For another thing, these thoughts did not feel strange in the sense that they were random or illogical, or even anxiety-inducing in and of themselves. What made them anxiety-inducing was rather that they were entirely rational, laid out, and perhaps even ordinary thoughts. They seemed indistinguishable from my own, yet they did not originate from me. These were thoughts about what I might eat for dinner, or what a person named Carol might have told me that day. I didn't know a Carol. And then there was black spots. When those thoughts had drifted into more nervous territory, they became masked from me. A swirl of nothingness filled their spot. I spent days battling these thoughts and telling no one but my doctor. I believed myself to be the only one, but then, 6 days before the launch of Apollo 98, one of the biochemists had committed suicide. Dr. Angela White. She was more of an acquaintance than a close friend, but I knew her well enough to be grief-stricken by the news. The team was thrown in disarray, and NASA scrambled to find somebody to fill his place, while the rest of us mourned this woman that we had come to know so well over the past 13 years. And as if that grief weren't enough to set me closer and closer to the edge of a breakdown, in those final days leading up to the Apollo 98 launch, there was also the video that Angela released to us all before taking her life. In it, she talked of losing her mind over those recent weeks. She talked of strange thoughts that didn't come from her. They filled her mind at night. Sometimes they were dark and foggy, and all I felt dripping through that black haze was fear. The words rang the loudest for me. Her experience, it mirrored my own. Her thoughts sounded just like mine in terms of their alien nature. They were intrusive, but not in the way that psychiatrists could understand. Or at least, Dr. Leslie Prescott announced that it made no sense to diagnose Dr. Angela White with schizophrenia or some other health condition. It was just a tragedy, he assured us. But later that evening, I realized why. Angela and I were not the only NASA workers on the Apollo 98 project to have experienced these sudden, inexplicable thoughts. In the cafeteria, several of us opened up to one another. Doctors, engineers, and pilots. It was Grantley Smith, an engineering friend of mine, who had kicked things off, bursting into tears. "Angela wasn't the only one," he said. "I've been hearing thoughts in my head at night. They sound so close to mine, but they're not mine. I mean, mostly they sound like mine, because they're the thoughts of a scared man. I think that we can all relate to that, can't we? We're all terrified of going on this mission, aren't we?" "Yes," was all that I managed to choke out. "Sure," agreed Dr. Helen Andrews. "But what are we going to do? We know classified information. If we drop out now, I doubt that we'll be able to live comfortable lives without NASA or Dozen Minus, or the American government constantly keeping tabs on us." "Well, then we stick the course," Grantley said. He offered me a smile, noting perhaps that I had turned quite a colorless shade. I didn't need to look in the mirror to know that much. At the very least, as those last few days on Earth had rushed by, I tried to cling desperately to the sense of camaraderie developing aboard the Apollo 98. I wasn't alone, I reminded myself. I had made friends over this past decade, and there was solidarity among us now that we had shared our experiences. There was division in terms of those who had experienced these intrusive thoughts and who hadn't, however. Dr. Prescott, who had experienced similar, held a meeting to discuss it. 32 of the 57 Apollo 98 team members raised hands to say that they had experienced these strange thoughts, And with that, I understood why he had dismissed claims of Dr. Angela White losing her mind, or at least not through conventional means. He knew she was not alone in this. What were the odds of 32 out of 57 people in the same workplace simultaneously developing schizophrenia within the period of a few months or even weeks? We were all minds of science and minds of logic. We knew that something more than mental illness in an earthly sense was to blame for this phenomenon. And 2 days before launch, folks started talking about leaving, and then talk had turned into action. 6 workers abandoned the project. I was mustering up the courage to join them, though my talk with friends the other day about the classified information that we knew had frightened me into staying. As it turned out, there was more to fear than the powers of authority on Earth. All 6 workers returned the very next morning, with only 1 day to spare before the launch, which relieved Dr. Prescott, who hadn't been able to fill their spots aboard the vessel with so little time to spare. We were all thankful to see them back, I think, until they explained why they had returned. The 6 of them talked among themselves in the cafeteria that morning, and one of them, Dr. Kieran Henley, volunteered himself to explain. The thoughts became noisier, he said. Dr. Prescott folded his arms but said nothing, giving Dr. Henley room to continue, so the physicist gulped and continued. All 6 of us experienced the same thing. I went home finally feeling free of this place, and I really thought the thoughts had stopped. But then came the screaming. Inside of our heads, said Dr. Sarah Langley, tapping her temple. It wouldn't stop, just screaming and crying, pleading. A voice was pleading with me to return to the mission, and Dr. Prescott's eyes widened. The voice spoke directly to you. She nodded. That was a horrifying new development. We all had suspected that the voices belonged to the collective of the messenger, but this confirmed it. They were in our minds. And as much as I'm sure we all considered trying our luck, going home to wait out the screaming and pleading, we all stayed aboard the Apollo 98. I came close to leaving. I played it out in my mind. I would drive home, go to bed, and deal with the screaming, and hope for the originator of the voice to eventually give up and leave us alone. But if these beings had such power, would they really stop there? I doubted it. On August 20th, 2024, the Apollo 98 launched, despite our team's fears. It seemed worse to disobey our mysterious messengers from the stars and risk some form of retribution down on Earth than to simply venture out and see what they had wanted. We were no match for the beings that could slip into our minds, and that much was certain. It was a 5-year journey, even with dozen Minus's advanced engines powering our interstellar craft. 5 years of living and working in a large metal comprising of intersecting tunnels and residences and working stations. It was a metal village. We had our roles to keep ourselves busy, and we socialized as we might if we were living in a real village back on Earth. But even discounting the voices that plagued the heads of half the workforce, there was a growing tension in the air with the passing months and then the years. Man was not built to withstand life caged in such confines, lost to that colorless vacuum of space. Tensions flared even among those who did not hear the voices, and often they directed their ire at us. I don't begrudge them. They were as frightened as us. Perhaps they were more frightened because they couldn't hear what we could hear. At least we had some connection to our messengers out there in deep space, as hazy as tenuous as that connection might be. As the years went by, the thoughts that I heard from my own individual voice became increasingly anxious and increasingly discreet, concealing its thoughts by muddying them behind a blackness. I became convinced that this was intentional. It felt practiced. Many of the alien's thoughts became off-limits, and what little remained of his headspace was a worrying cacophony of jumbled ideas. The fear of these voices allayed some of the Apollo 98 team members. It makes them seem weak and vulnerable like us, Grantley pointed out to me one evening in the cafeteria. When I hear glimpses of my voice's worries and concerns about whether the meeting with us will go well, it reminds me that these are not gods. They're mortals like us, and they're scared. I don't know, I said. I think scared people are the most dangerous. He raised a brow. People. Most folks still called them aliens, but there had been a growing consensus among many that these were people in one form or another, and so I nodded my head. People, I reiterated. Don't you feel it too? And Grantley shrugged. Now my heart does, but my head says it makes no sense. The messengers being people as in fellow humans makes no sense. What would they be doing out there in the stars, so many light years from not only Earth or the solar system, but even the Milky Way? It's impossible. And if you had asked me 2 decades ago whether it was possible for a craft to be jettisoned into space by engines this powerful, capable of this speed, I would have called that impossible too. I tapped my head. And let's not even talk about the impossibility of these voices in our heads. I think you need to change your conception of what these messengers are capable of doing, and what surprises the universe is capable of hurling at us. And Grantley sighed. I hate it when you do that, Michael. What? Come up with an answer for everything. It's always the most horrible possible explanation, too. I laughed. Sorry. And Grantley didn't laugh, however, and the nearer that we came to the coordinates, the more that became the norm across Apollo 98. Even those without voices in their heads seemed to have less and less to laugh about. Folks in the cafeteria grew lethargic. For that matter, they weren't even putting in the effort to debating with one another about the nature of the messengers anymore. It was easier to keep our trap shut, like Grantley had said. Sometimes answers to questions were more horrible than the unknown. It was better to hope for some simple and soothing explanation to the nature of our extraterrestrial summoners, though none of us could think of one, hence why we had stopped trying to answer our questions about them. Besides, we knew that we would learn the truth soon enough. And when the new year of 2024 had arrived, a somber atmosphere had filled the cafeteria. And gone was that fleeting evening of frivolity and relaxation that we had known from New Year's celebrations of the prior 5 years. Now all we could think about was the relatively little time left on the clock. The countdown on the wall screen told us that we had 8 days and 12 hours until we would reach the coordinates given to us by our mysterious messenger, nearly 20 years earlier. Dr. Prescott gave us a speech that evening, perhaps hoping that liquor and fatigue would have lulled us into a dull and malleable state. I don't think that he had to worry about heated moments anymore. As I said, we had lost the will to argue with one another. But I sensed as that wise-and old man hushed us from the floor of the cafeteria, that he was on the verge of saying something which might rattle us all again. There is a pained expression on his creased face. We are nearing our destination, which none of you need me to say, the old man announced. In a little over a week, we will have arrived at the coordinates given to us by our messenger. But the reason I wish to make a speech this evening is that we have just received data back from our advanced transmission technology, fired ahead of the vessel to scan the environment before we reach the designated coordinates. Faces perked up across the room. Alcohol-hazed eyes sobered up a little, and some folks put down their drinks to pay closer attention to the old man. They didn't want a drink to addle their senses. An anomaly, Dr. Prescott said. That is what the data shows. An absence of matter, a rip in the very fabric of reality. Not a black hole, else we would be facing a risk of being pulled in and turned to debris. No, it's like nothing that we've ever seen. What do you mean by that? A scientist called out as voices in the room started to murmur, and fear clouded the air in a thick fog. "I have a hypothesis," said Prescott. "Oh, here we go," mumbled an engineer nearby, another one of his crackpot ideas. "He's been losing the plot this past year," another engineer agreed. "Another universe," Prescott said. "A parallel reality." Over those following days, some mocked Dr. Prescott for his baseless hypothesis, and others chattered fearfully about the possibility of it being true. I focused mainly on that voice in my head. It was loudening day by day. I kept waking in the middle of the night assured that something was watching me, much as I had been back on Earth. But the feeling was worsening, and as black and muddy as those thoughts in my head were, they were impossibly louder and more vivid than ever. My skin itched. I thought of Prescott's hypothesis. I thought of our messenger and his people who were perhaps crawling into our reality from another dimension, watching us from the shadows of our ship already. Was that possible? Was any of this possible? I was becoming untethered from reality. I felt already as if I had slipped into some state of psychosis. Strange words and ideas were entering my mind, cutting occasionally through the murkiness of the voice that tried so fervently to block me from his thoughts. Nanomachines. That word kept playing over and over in my mind on a loop. My heart fluttered. I could feel the fear in this voice as he thought or spoke that word to himself. And why was I so certain that it was a he anyway? For months I had thought the voice to simply be my own, parroting ideas from the messenger. But now I was convinced that I was hearing the alien, clear as day in my brain. It was a he, and he was scared of this one word. Nanomachines. That was a human concept. Perhaps it was one of mostly science fiction, but it was a human concept. I thought of the conversation Grantley and I had not so long earlier. The messengers were human, and I was sure of it. I was so sure of it, in fact, that I wasn't filled with shock by what had followed. Arrival day came. The Apollo 98 slowed its flight and rolled to a stop at the coordinates given, and we all crowded around the viewpoints throughout the vessel. We expected to see some grand cosmic horror in the depths of space, staring back at us, but we were greeted only by blackness. We were greeted, in fact, by a lack of stars, a lack of anything. That terrified me more than a large serrated tear in the fabric of reality, as Prescott had called it. And after hours of waiting and wondering whether we were supposed to do something to announce our arrival to the messenger, there came a shape that slipped out of the darkness. A white shape wormed its way into the space before our ship, as if birthed by the universe itself. "It's a ship," somebody nearby whispered. And there appeared from a hole like a sliver in reality, our gargantuan vessel that was hauntingly familiar. From the stunned gasps and whispers that filled the hallway, I knew that everybody shared my disbelief. They shared my eagerness to dismiss this impossibility with some rational explanation, as much as we had spent months doing already. But there was no denying the pristine white text printed on the side of this vessel. Apollo 98. This was a carbon copy of our ship. "It's us," Dr. Prescott croaked. "Dear God, it's us, don't you see? It all makes sense now. A parallel reality. Parallel versions of us." And it did make sense. It made sense to me, at least. I wondered whether I had been woefully refusing to accept the plain truth staring me in the face those many months. Of course, we had all been hearing alternate selves in our heads. Maybe those alternate selves had been watching us. Maybe their thoughts and ours were intermingling, as two alternate selves should not exist in such proximity. Maybe that explained the black fog, though I was convinced still that something was afoot. these other selves were hiding something from us. People aboard the ship argued about the absurdity of it all as the parallel Apollo 98 crawled closer to ours. And as it did, I noticed some slight differences in the craftsmanship of the vessel. It did look slightly larger than ours, and the various hull compartments seemed welded perhaps in marginally different ways. There were more of those disputing voices, of course, the 20-odd crew members who had experienced none of these intrusive thoughts, and thought the rest of us were out of our minds and let their feelings be known. But these were scientists, engineers, and doctors, intelligent people. They knew, I think, that something inexplicable was coming for us, and it had perhaps always known that, as there was no explaining the vast majority of their crew losing their minds in unison. I saw the panic in their eyes, the same as it lingered in all of our eyes. Dr. Prescott was right. Aboard this near-identical Apollo 98 would be near-identical copies of us, I was sure. There would be another me, Michael Thompson, a man who worried excessively about nanomachines, and a woman named Carol, a man so like me yet entirely unique for me. Why did this thought terrify me so? It was a nightmare, I supposed, but there was more to it than that. It was the other Michael's fear. That was what frightened me. Floating in my mind was the question of why these alternate selves had called to us in the first place. But this seemed a foolish question in a way. Why wouldn't they call to us? If we had found this rip between realities first, we would have done the same. We would have called out to our alternate selves. There was a division aboard the ship. People either agreed or disagreed with Dr. Prescott's hypothesis, proving that seeing something with one's eyes is not always sufficient for belief. The Apollo 98 on the side of the vessel was not, for all the crew members, sufficient evidence that we were seeing a copy of our own ship. And in the same way, the voices in our heads, so like our own but not quite the same, were also not evidence of alternate selves aboard. A definite answer came when a video transmission appeared on the control room screen, and Dr. Prescott invited us all in to see the other Apollo 98, which was messaging us. He laughed jubilantly at the sight of his own face on the screen. An alternate Dr. Prescott laughed back, and several folks in the control room pointed and gasped as they saw their alternate selves looking back at them on the transmitted live feed from the other Apollo 98. We agreed to meet one another. Our two Apollo 98s joined via link bridges connecting the two airlocks, and across the parallel selves came to our vessel. They had 68 crew members to our 57, and 32 of their crew members were identical to ours. It all lined up. We had been hearing our alternate selves in our heads, just as Prescott hypothesized, and my face paled as I saw a man of a medium build with brunette locks and a little stubble, who mostly looked to be an exact replica of me. "Hello," he mumbled nervously. My ears rang and my skull vibrated. Here we were, facing each other in reality at long last, and his voice was still there in my head, but it was also pouring out of his real-life lips. And as if he were thinking the same, he said, "It's strange to put a face to the voice." My eyes widened, of course. "You heard my thoughts too." He nodded, but he kept his eyes low, struggling to meet my gaze. The air of guilt to him was impossible to set aside. He seemed meek and sheepish, and that was how I would differentiate us. I asked him about Carol. They were lovers, apparently. "It seems you've had a more fruitful life than mine," I said. And the sheepish look deepened. Was it all too much for him? I understood that, but I was handling it all with a sense of far more curiosity and excitement. He was different from me, I told myself, an alternate self. We weren't exactly the same person, yet I had spent so many months with his thoughts in my mind, just as he had felt mine, so I knew that we were one and the same. I had always known it, I think. We had just lived different lives. We had traversed different timelines. I kept thinking about the black thoughts. "Were you hiding parts of yourself from me?" I asked. He scratched his wrist, and then his eyes became sharp and cautionary, and he looked over his shoulder at his Dr. Prescott and raised a trembling finger to his lips. "Don't," he said. "Don't talk about that." I noticed similar uncomfortable conversations taking place between others who seemed at odds with their alternate selves. Maybe they had all asked similar questions. Why the black fog and why the hidden thoughts? Why the fear lurking in their heads? "Nanomachines," I blurted out. Other Michael's eyes widened and he trembled, scratching his wrist again. There was a silver band wrapped around it. I had noted similar on others from the alternate Apollo 98 vessel. "What is that?" I asked, pointing at it. "And why do you keep scratching at it?" "Nothing." But his voice betrayed him in my mind. Protection, he thought. An instinct came over me, an urge to get that wristband off him by any means necessary. I had noted that this alternate version of me had a slighter build. He hadn't been eating as well, perhaps, as there was a gauntness to his face that was only perceptible up close. I was stronger than him. I could best him physically. I took hold of his wrist and felt quickly for the clasp. "Don't," he whispered. But he was like me, the type to freeze up when afraid rather than fighting. I had been counting on that. I unclasped the band and attached it to my wrist, and the other Michael swung a hand at me trying to take it back. But I pulled it away, stepping backwards into a table. "What is it?" I said, eyeing the band on my wrist. "What do you mean by protection?" Other Michael went pale. "You weren't supposed to hear that. Oh God, oh God." And then it started. The coughing, the heavy breathing, the clawing at his skin, but worst of all, it wasn't just other Michael. I looked around the cafeteria and saw that my fellow crew members were all doing the same. I put my hands to my head as his pain became my own. His dying thoughts flooded my brain, and I shrieked in terror as I secondhand experienced death itself. There were no tangible conscious thoughts on which to grasp. There were no words or clear ideas. There was only internal screaming, transmitted from his brain to mine, as we were tethered together in death as much as life. And I saw the other parallel selves in the room scream and clutch their temples in much the same way as me, feeling the pain of the alternate selves they were butchering with their micro-machines. It was just in a sense that they should feel the agonizing torture that they had inflicted upon their other versions. To watch steel flay flesh alive in such minuscule pieces was a horror that I can't put into words, but I felt it as I watched other Michael perish. But there was no justice in experiencing his death. It wasn't like the others. I didn't ask for this. I was only pretending to be one of them. Other Michael's skin peeled away, revealing a red underlayer, and then bone, and then nothing. Nanomachines. I watched as the room filled with screaming people, clawing at their own bodies as tiny machines unseen by the naked eye tore them to shreds. "Thank you for this universe. Our own was dying," said other Prescott as the Dr. Prescott that I knew started to disintegrate before him. "We will fill your places nicely, and those of you without alternate counterparts, well, you'll just have to be unfortunate casualties of a 5-year interstellar journey, I'm afraid." I didn't understand. I mean, how could I understand? I would have to ask somebody what it all meant. I would have to ask why these parallel selves had come from another reality to so violently and terrifyingly replace us by shredding us down to nothing with tiny machines. But I couldn't do that, because that would have given me away. I was supposed to be the other Michael. I was supposed to know what was going on. And so I blended in as best as I could. I kept to myself, avoiding Carol and any other friends of other Michael who would sense that I wasn't the same. I used his stolen thoughts to cover my tracks. I feigned a moral dilemma. It seemed my alternate self had been having doubts about the horrible nature of the mission, despite his own universe dying and his people needing this replacement one. And I think they bought it. I think they had seen other Michael deteriorating mentally in the months leading up to the Apollo 98's arrival. It worked well then that I was in the midst of a psychological breakdown of my own. I won't tell a soul, I promised the onboard psychiatrist every time that he brought me in for a little chat. I'm just struggling with... Well, don't, interjected the doctor. Don't struggle, Mr. Thompson. This only works if we all wear our biggest smiles and convince the people of this reality that we're the same Apollo 98 crew members who left on the mission 5 years ago. Okay? Okay. 5 years. I spent another 5 years quietly keeping my head down and watching these technologically advanced others go about their lives and working patterns on Apollo 98, as if they hadn't just massacred their parallel selves to earn their places in this new reality. And as we neared Earth, I just had to hope their designs were purely those of survival. I had to hope they didn't have anything else in store for the humanity of our universe. I still have to hope that. We arrive home this year. When the Department of Defense stated that one of the functions of the Space Force was to deter aggression from space, they were not talking about man-made threats from space or simple natural dangers such as asteroids. What they meant were things that were much worse. Out there in the void, there are great threats that are just lurking and waiting to stumble upon humanity. Solar 6 was the first to discover this truth. Launched as part of the then Air Force Space Command's confidential solar reconnaissance program, the purpose of the initiative was to explore the solar system for future military application. At the time, the Russians were doing something similar, with them having sent at least 2 probes before our first could even get off the ground. Not wanting to lose the ultimate high ground, Space Commander hastily created and launched interplanetary space probes in order to catch up. And despite being developed in a rush, the probes were well equipped with a powerful array of sensors and visual monitoring equipment, with a lot of the technology used being far greater than what NASA had at the time. Able to relay large amounts of information and high-quality images of the various planets, moons, and asteroids in our system, they were supposed to find potential locations for outposts in deep space. However, what they found instead broke everything that we knew about the universe. The 6th probe launched in the program, Solar 6, was tasked with exploring Jupiter and its moons. It was supposed to be like the other missions, boring and uneventful. But upon entering the sphere of influence of the planet, it began seeing wings. Numbering in the hundreds, gigantic golden wings spanning 1,000 miles long and 100 miles wide started appearing in front of the probe. From what could be observed as the probe moved closer to Jupiter, dozens of these wings littered the planet's orbit. Receiving the video feed more than half an hour after they were taken, Solar 6's mission control quickly studied the footage and they were left baffled. Previous observations of the planet had never noted these objects before. Earth-based, Earth-orbiting telescopes and NASA Pioneer and Voyager missions never noticed them. Even the telescopic images of the planet hours before the probe's approach had no visual of them. Yet there they were right in front of the probe, circling it and almost creating a ring. Unsure of how to proceed after the strange sighting, Mission Control quickly passed on the information up the chain of command. Eventually, the reply back to them was to continue with the probe's orbital insertion, but the objective of the reconnaissance shifted from surveying the moons to surveying the wings. However, as the probe conducted its orbital insertion burn, a new object was sighted. Like the wings, this was not seen from any observation devices on or around Earth. Even with its size, it just couldn't be spotted from our planet. Spanning 2,500 miles in diameter and locked into Jupiter's orbit was a giant sphere. Yet, despite its shape, it wasn't a previously undiscovered moon of the planet. Instead, it was another anomaly in this place. And covering the surface of the object were eyes, thousands of them in different sizes, some closed and some open. Along with these eyes were various golden stumps and golden wings, similar to those that were floating around orbit. As the probe got closer and began to orbit around the sphere, two of the stumps on the object were found to be far longer than the rest and seemed to have been composed of a different material that resembled skin. However, imagery and electronic scans were not enough to confirm what the material exactly was at the time. Despite that, from all the initial surveys and studies of the object, the scientists and researchers attached to Mission Control believed that whatever the sphere was, it was a living object. At least it had once been living. Found during the mapping of the surface were two large holes that penetrated its exterior. Closer inspection and radar mapping of these puncture points revealed the hollow interior of the object. The scientists concluded that this was the likely cause of death of this massive creature. That then left the questions of what killed it and where was the perpetrator now. In search for an answer, Solar 6 was maneuvered all over the orbit of Jupiter, trying to locate any other anomaly in the vicinity. Eventually, the probe ended up in the orbit of Callisto, where another anomaly was found. Floating there was a long limb-like object. On one end of this object was a hand with hundreds of fingers that held a sword. The sword measured 1,000 miles long and 50 miles wide. Like the previous anomalies, it was not able to be viewed from Earth. By the time the mission around Jupiter was declared over, the probe had explored the sphere, the hand and sword, as well as 20 of the wings in order to extract as much information as it could from them. And to the dismay of Mission Control though, all the surveying did little to reveal where these anomalies came from, why it was here and how it had met its fate. However, it was at least concluded that all the anomalies found stemmed from one original anomaly, which centered around the large spherical object. Due to this, it as well as its spread of remains, was designated as Cosmic Anomaly Number 1 and marked for future explorations by future probes dedicated to its study. On the other hand, the anomaly responsible for killing Cosmic Anomaly Number 1 was designated as Cosmic Anomaly Number 2, although concrete proof of existence has yet to be found. Furthermore, the presence of such an anomaly, as well as the unknown location and state of the mysterious Cosmic Anomaly Number 2, prompted Air Force Space Command to take more actions at better monitoring and securing deep space. With the government's backing, funds were secretly provided to Air Force Space Command, to the dismay of supporters of the Strategic Defense Initiative. The government believed that threats from deep space were far more concerning than ones from Earth. In order to limit the number of personnel aware of cosmic anomalies so that secrecy could be easier maintained, the Anti-Cosmic Threat Division, or ACT Division for short, was formed by Space Command. That way, all such cosmic issues could be funneled into the division and ensure that no information about them could leak out to the public and cause mass panic. With backing and funding from the government, the ACT Division proceeded to create and launch a series of missions to further increase their monitoring abilities in deep space, fearing that Cosmic Anomaly Number 2 may emerge again and threaten human spacecraft or Earth itself. Unmanned monitoring stations were established at our natural satellite and the natural satellites of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Additionally, missions were also launched to Jupiter with the goal of further exploring and studying the remnants of cosmic anomaly number 1, with this being humanity's first encounter with an extraterrestrial life form. The scientists attached to the Activision were desperate to learn more about it. However, the constant travel of spacecraft from Earth and these solar system's planets resulted in encounters with new cosmic anomalies. Jupiter Picket 10 was to be the 10th monitoring post for the Jupiter observation line. It was supposed to be a fairly normal and uneventful mission, but on the 16th month of its journey, while it was still on approach to Jupiter, it encountered a strange object that suddenly manifested before it. Analysis of footage and radar readings before the encounter showed no sign of anything in the vicinity of the spacecraft at the time. Yet in the flash of a moment, an object that resembled a naval vessel appeared before it. Further examination of the object revealed to Mission Control that it looked similar to a destroyer escort from the Second World War. That alone was a strange sight. However, careful observation of the object revealed that it wasn't just a mere destroyer somehow lost in space. On the ship's hull, dotted all over it, were various human body parts. From heads, arms, legs, and whole torsos, these parts protruded from the hull and moved frantically and erratically. These parts weren't just sticking out from the ship though. Instead, they seemed to be a part of the ship, somehow merged with the steel that it was made from. Focusing Jupiter Picket 10's camera on the various protruding heads on the hull, a majority of them could be seen with their mouths wide open. Whatever sound they could be making, however, could not be heard through the vacuum of space. From the pained expression on their faces, though, it was believed by many in Mission Control that they were screaming. One head presented a different expression to the rest, though. Located near the bridge of the destroyer escort, the head's eyes stared directly at the probe's camera, as if it knew where it was located. After gazing at the camera with a pained and sad expression, it then opened and closed its mouth slowly, as if it was trying to communicate something. Based on the interpretation of its lip movement, experts concluded that it was trying to say, "Help us." And then, just as suddenly as the object had appeared, it suddenly disappeared, leaving no trace aside from the imagery and data that our probe had recorded. One important piece of information gathered from the encounter was the name and hull number of the destroyer escort. However, when the Air Force inquired the Navy about information on the ship that bore that name and number, all the Navy stated that it had indeed been a ship commissioned with them during the Second World War. All further information about its service, though, were marked as confidential and could not be shared. The Activision would eventually label this object as Cosmic Anomaly Number 3, and it would periodically appear and be detected for brief moments of time over the years. As more probes and unmanned installations were launched and positioned across the solar system, the Activision slowly but surely got a better look of the deep space that surrounded us. This also meant the revelation of more anomalies. A few years after first encounter with Cosmic Anomaly Number 3, the Activision started losing contact with the Picket station on Saturn and its moons. One by one, the probes and installations there suddenly stopped transmitting. Reviewing the footage from the probes before they stopped transmitting, the Activision did their best to try to figure out what exactly had happened. It turned out to be a difficult task, though, as the available footage didn't show what could have been the cause. And due to this, it was believed that the loss of transmission could have been caused by a sudden interference in the area that prevented the probes and installation from transmitting its signals back to Earth. However, a frame from the footage caught by Saturn Station 16 told a different tale. Emplaced at the moon of Phoebe, it managed to catch sight of something that looked like a scaly tentacle heading towards it. It only appeared briefly, but it caught in it a single frame before transmission was lost. That was the evidence that proved what had happened wasn't a simple signal anomaly. At first, it was believed that this was the result of cosmic anomaly number 2, as it had been the only anomaly that had been deemed active and hostile at the time. Although this caused some fear among the members of the Activision, they were not caught unprepared. They had been preparing for years for such a scenario and soon quickly got into action activating contingency plans. The main contingency plan applied for this threat was Operation Hammer, which relied on armed autonomous probes to deal with the threat. Armed with an array of nuclear-tipped missiles, the probes, dubbed Vanguard Deep Space Strike Vehicles, were to swarm the anomaly and bombard its payload. There was no guarantee that dozens upon dozens of nuclear weapons would be enough to destroy a cosmic anomaly, but at the time it was the best weapon that the Activision had. In order for the Vanguard probes to strike their target though, they must first find it. And due to this, all the probes and installations throughout the solar system were thoroughly monitored to see if they could catch a glimpse of cosmic anomaly number 2. But aside from the loss of the ones at the Saturn observation line, no other monitoring system was lost or had caught sight of the anomaly. It seemed that the threat was limited to the Saturn area. To establish better surveillance of the threat, a series of reconnaissance probes were launched to replace the monitoring posts that were lost at Saturn, so that these probes would reach Saturn quickly and prevent the anomaly from disappearing while we were blind. They were equipped with the continuous acceleration drive, and this new propulsion system enabled spacecraft to increase its speed substantially and cut down travel time through the solar system. Yet despite this, the first of the reconnaissance probes, Eagle Eye 1, did not arrive at Saturn's sphere of influence until 13 months after its launch. Due to this, it was feared by many in the Activision that the anomaly had slipped past them during the wide interval. As it would turn out, that wasn't the case. The moment the probe got close to Saturn, a set of scaly tentacles suddenly reached out towards it. The speed of the tentacles was so fast that they were barely caught by the probe's cameras. One moment it was flying through space, and the next it was held in place and unable to maneuver away. It was just like what had happened to Saturn Station 16. This time it was different though. Instead of immediately destroying the probe, the tentacle wrapped itself around it first and held it in place. Then, to the surprise of everybody in mission control, a smaller tentacle suddenly emerged and began tapping on one of the probe's cameras. The tapping continued for a few minutes, before the tentacle began rubbing itself on the camera's lens. As it did this, a dark black-red liquid was left imprinted on the lens. Eventually, it managed to write out, "Leave me alone." After that, a signal from Eagle Eye 1 was lost. Due to the passivity of the anomaly and the fact that it seemed to be fixed in its orbit, the Activision concluded that the living planet of Saturn was not cosmic anomaly number 2, but a different anomaly of its own. With its tentacles' impressive yet still limited reach, it declared impossible for it to have attacked cosmic anomaly number 1 at Jupiter. Saturn was thus labeled as cosmic anomaly number 4. Realizing that no amount of nuclear warheads would be enough to destroy a planet, Operation Hammer was cancelled before the Vanguard probes could connect their trans-Saturn injection. Meanwhile, the reconnaissance probes already sent out were maneuvered to ensure that they positioned themselves in a high orbit above Saturn, thus ensured that they were just out of reach of the planet's deadly tentacles. Once in a while, the high-orbiting probes would observe the planet, attempt to grab for them, but to no avail. The first face-to-face encounter between man and the anomaly occurred during REAP missions. The missions were a part of a wider operation called Lazarus, which had the main goal of collecting the remains of cosmic anomaly number 1 in order to further study them and see what could be useful for humanity. The mission also happens to be my first assignment with the Activision after graduating from the Air Force's astronaut training program. Assigned to mission control, I was one of the astronauts that acted as Capcom for the 5-man crew aboard the manned deep space transporter heading to Jupiter. Thanks to the continuous acceleration drive, travel time for the crew to their destination only took 8 months. However, barely even 2 months into their journey, the mission encountered something strange. It began with an alert. Deep space monitoring satellites in Earth orbit and the radar aboard the spacecraft detected a dense group of unidentified objects ahead of the vehicle. Observing these objects and calculating their trajectory, it was found that they were on a perpendicular path towards the spacecraft. Knowing the dangers of flying into a field of deep space objects, the mission's FIDO suggested a quick maneuver to ensure that the spacecraft avoided intersecting with the objects. However, before I could call them up to relay this to the crew, the commander of the spacecraft sent out a transmission first.
Midway, this is Reaper 1. Came the call on my headset and the speakers around the mission control center. Are you seeing what we're seeing? I think we see someone floating in there.
Reaper 1, this is Midway, I transmitted. What do you mean by someone? Do you mean an anomaly or do you mean humans? The distance between us and the spacecraft meant that there would be a delay in the reply. As we waited though, the mission's Cronus displayed the video feed that was being received directly from Reaper 1. In it we could see footage from one of the high-powered exterior cameras being controlled by the crew, as they pointed and focused in on the unknown object cluster. Zooming in on the cluster, images of various broken and torn spacecraft modules could be seen floating in space. It then became evident that the objects being detected were from a destroyed spacecraft. A further scan of some of these modules revealed the Russian flag, giving us an identity as to where they were from. Air Force Space Command had known that Russian spacecraft were also operating in deep space, but the fact that one of them was destroyed was news to me. As the camera shifted away from the modules, it soon focused in on a different subject. Caught in the middle of the cluster was a figure of a man, naked, bloated, and completely exposed to the vacuum of space. The man floated freely among the debris. He wasn't alone though. 3 more men were seen floating freely just like him, completely unprotected and bloated. And due to their situation, it wasn't hard to understand why many in mission control quickly concluded that they were dead and had most likely been sucked out when their spacecraft was suddenly destroyed. However, continued observation pointed out that there was something wrong about them. When comparing their size with the size of the debris around them, it was soon realized that they were far larger than it. Estimates revealed that the 4 floating men were at least 50 meters in height. Yet that wasn't the only strange thing about it.
Midway, this is Reaper 1.
Came the sudden transmission from the crew as we at mission control scratched our heads and wondered what had happened to those cosmonauts.
We think they're still alive.
Sure enough, as we further studied the footage, we could see subtle movements from each of the men, as their arms and legs fidgeted and swung. Somehow, despite being completely exposed to the harshness of space, they were still alive. They weren't just alive though, they were also fully conscious and in complete pain. Reaper 1 eventually maneuvered just enough to avoid the cluster, yet still close enough to get a good look at it from its cameras. The crew and us in mission control got a better look of the cosmonauts. The image would forever be ingrained in my mind. Eyes bloated, expression contorted in pain. They were clearly suffering. Somehow, something was preventing death to end their torture. As the cluster passed by and continued on its journey, I shuddered at the thought that they would be forever stuck in a solar orbit, unable to end their pain, as they drifted in space for eternity. The Activision would label those 4 unfortunate cosmonauts, including whatever caused them to expand that large and become seemingly immortal, as Cosmic Anomaly number 5. Following a year-long assignment as a Capcom for a few more REAP missions, I eventually began training for a long-term space operations in order to join in the next phase of Operation Lazarus. When I was finally sent up a year and a half after the training, I found myself on a journey to Jupiter and my new place of deployment, Archangel Station. And built within the remains of Cosmic Anomaly Number 1, Archangel Station was the farthest manned outpost the Activision had in deep space. Created in order to easier study the remnants of the anomaly, as well as ensure that the nation had a strong presence at Jupiter. The station was thus a crucial part of Space Command. When I first arrived at the station, the majority of its infrastructure had already been completed. Beneath the surface of the once living entity, a series of layered structures were constructed, which housed the living quarters, the command center, the science bay, nuclear reactors, and various other facilities necessary for the station's mission and day-to-day needs. There was, however, a lot of activity and new construction when I had arrived at the station. As we approached the monstrous sphere orbiting Jupiter, I saw some astronauts conducting EVAs on one side of the facility, where they conducted work to attach and secure dozens of continuous acceleration drives onto the surface. Meanwhile, on a different portion of the sphere, work was being done for an extremely large docking area, with various electrical wiring, hydraulics, and strange red-colored calves being placed there by a team of astronauts. What exactly they were doing there, I wasn't sure at the time, but I made no effort trying to figure it out. After all, my mission here involves something else, and I didn't want to waste time wondering about things that I knew I wouldn't get the answers to unless the Activision deemed it necessary for me to know. After a month of getting acquainted with life in the station and assisting in various auxiliary duties, I and 44 other astronauts were transported out of the station and sent to Callisto, in orbit around the moon, to a relatively small outpost in comparison to Archangel Station. Labeled as Outpost Number 12, the modular station could house up to 100 astronauts and orbited around the moon. Meanwhile, directly below it and also orbiting Jupiter's natural satellite was the titanic, anomalous sword and severed arm of Cosmic Anomaly Number 1. Our mission at Outpost Number 12 was simple: to recover the sword and bring it to Archangel Station for studying and testing. However, throughout the entire process, our stay in the station was anything but peaceful. It all began with the voices. No matter what time it was, somehow the sound of hoarse, tired, and sorrowful voices echoed from outside the walls of the station. We didn't know how it was possible, and video observation of the hall revealed nothing there, yet we could hear it. And during my first sleep cycle at Outpost 12, the voices kept on speaking words that I couldn't understand. It kept me up all through the hours that I was supposed to be sleeping, as I felt uneasy the entire time and felt as if someone was watching me because of them. Of course, senior officers at Archangel Station were aware of this situation after we had informed them of what we were hearing. The suggestion of the chief medical officers over there was for us to use sleeping pills to get through our sleeping cycles, but somehow they did little to help us, as the voices still kept us awake. By my second sleep cycle, the voices started to become clearer, as I was able to understand some of the words that they were saying.
Help. Michael. Flames.
All the words they said seemed random, but they kept me up again nonetheless. Attempts to drown out the noise with a headset and music were met with utter failure too, as I could somehow still hear them despite those tools. By the third night, however, I somehow got acclimated to the noise and eventually got some much-needed rest. When I woke up, a lot of the other astronauts, aside from an unlucky few, had also gotten used to the voices. However, on day 7 of our stay there, things started to become stranger. I had just finished a long work cycle, having conducted hours of EVA to attach maneuvering thruster pods onto the anomalous swords. As I closed my eyes to start my sleep cycle, I heard the usual call of the voices start, but there was something different. Suddenly opening my eyes, I stared at the walls of my cabin and I listened once again.
Son, is that you?
The voice said, but this wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was the voice of my long deceased father.
Son, please talk to me.
The voice spoke again, continuing to bear my father's voice. Hearing it speak with my father's voice made me sure that I wasn't just imagining it. It was definitely his voice that I was hearing, and it sent a shiver of fear down my spine. How was it doing that? How did it know my father's voice? He had been dead for years. Sighing, I tried my best to ignore it. I had learned how to sleep with the voices for a few days by that point, so I was sure that I could do it again. And yet I couldn't. Hearing them steal my father's voice and use it to call to me specifically brought a new form of fear and uneasiness. And by the time that my sleep cycle had ended, it was clear that I wasn't the only one suffering from the new attacks that these bodiless anomalies were doing. My batch that was scheduled to sleep that night were kept awake by hearing voices of loved ones and friends calling out to them. Other astronauts who went through followed us suffered the same fate. This was bad news for us who had just gotten used to sleeping with the noise, but even worse for those who still hadn't rested at all. Eventually, Major Stewart, the commander of the outpost, had to place these people on light duty, as they were clearly not fit to do any other work. For days, the voices continued to call to us, with each person hearing different voices of people that they knew each time they tried to go to sleep. For me, I heard the voices of my father, mother, ex-girlfriends, and even old teachers call out to me. It was terrible, and I often ended up shouting back at the voices, telling them to stop. And during some sleep cycles, I was able to block out the noise and get some resemblance of sleep. But eventually, I would be rudely awakened, as the voices called out my name just to disturb me. After a few days of such a constant harassment, it began to take a toll on me and everybody on board. Work efficiency drastically dropped, yet we powered on, knowing that the sooner we accomplished our task, the sooner we would leave. And then came the incident. It happened during the end of my work shift, and due to the fatigue I gained from the recent change in the voices, I was relegated to light duties as a communications officer in the command module of the outpost. And joining me there was Lieutenant Phillips, a younger astronaut who I got to know pretty well on the way to the Jupiter observation line. Like me, he was fatigued by the recent change in the voices and was given light duties as the outpost systems officer. Unlike me though, he looked like a walking zombie, with large, dark bags under his bloodshot eyes. He was clearly in far worse shape than I was. While I only lost sleep when the voices started bearing the names of people that we knew, Phillips had barely slept at all since we were sent to the outpost. In the almost 2 weeks that we've been there, he's only had 3 sleep cycles of rest and none of them complete and continuous. And that was why he was assigned to light duties, such as keeping an eye on the outpost systems, because it would cause the least trouble if he ever slipped up from fatigue. At least, that was what we thought at the time. As I was floating by the communication system, headset on and listening to the chatter by those out on EVA, I suddenly heard someone speak inside the module. At first, I thought it was Phillips greeting Major Stewart, who was supposed to be checking up on us around that time. To my surprise though, Major Stewart wasn't there. As I turned around to check, all I saw was Phillips talking to himself. Curious, I slowly took off my headset and managed to catch a portion of what he was saying. "Yes, Major, I'll do it immediately," was what Phillips said, before floating towards the control panel that controlled the outposts, hatches, and airlocks. And before I could even ask him what he was doing, he suddenly started opening a few of switch guards before quickly flipping the switches. Suddenly, an alarm in the command module started blaring and screeching, as a screen nearby alerted that the air pressure in the crew quarters module was plummeting. Turning my head to another screen, I watched in horror as the surveillance camera pointed at airlock D displayed of fellow astronauts being sucked out of their cabins and thrown into the vacuum of space. "What did you do?" I asked, as I pushed my way and quickly floated towards the control panel that Phillips was at, and began switching them back to close the hatches that he had opened. "I was just following the Major's orders," Phillips simply replied to me. I stared back at him with a confused expression. "The Major's orders?" I said in disbelief, as I gestured to the module that was empty aside from the presence of us two. "Are you out of your mind? He's not here." "No," he simply said in reply as he shook his head. "His orders were loud and clear. Open the airlocks, that's what he told me directly." "Phillips, nobody gave you those orders," I yelled back. And then a voice spoke to me. It was Major Stewart's voice. "And that's right. No one gave him those orders. He simply acted on his own." Relieved to finally have some backup, I turned around hoping to see Major Stewart there. But he wasn't. Instead, it was just the empty module. That was strange. I swear that I heard the Major for a second. Turning back to face Phillips, I looked at him to see an empty expression on his face. It didn't yet seem that he had realized what he had done. "Oh, the fatigue has gotten to him." The Major's voice spoke again. I turned around once more, but like before, he wasn't there. This was starting to scare me as I looked around the module, hoping to see any sign of the Major. Perhaps it came from the radio, I eventually thought. Maybe I was hearing his voice echoing up from my headset. With the headset still connected to the radio on the other side of the module, it seemed strange that I managed to hear the Major's voice so clearly, but it was the only logical explanation.
"You must kill him to protect the outposts."
A chill ran down my spine as I heard that. I suddenly felt scared. But it wasn't because of what the Major's voice said. No, it wasn't because of that. It was because I was certain that I heard the voice from inside my head. How was that possible?
"Kill him.
The voice repeated, and more aggressive this time.
Do it. Kill him."
The voice ordered, as I placed my hands on my ears. It was to no avail though, as I could still hear the voice.
"Kill him.
It repeated, but this time it sounded different.
Kill him and save the outposts."
At that point I realized that it now sounded like my voice. It was starting to sound as if it was my own thoughts telling me what to do.
"Kill him, kill him, kill him."
As the voice inside my head raised, a crescendo in my head, another voice suddenly echoed out. What the hell happened here? It was the Major's voice again, but this time it sounded different. Turning around, I was thankful to see Major Stewart and two other officers floating by the entrance to the module, looking at me before turning their attention to Phillips, and then they floated towards us to understand what exactly had unfolded. In the end, Phillips was confined into the medical bay before being transported out of Outpost 12 and sent back to the station for further examination and treatment. From what I heard, the moment that he left the outpost, he seemed to have returned to his normal self, although the news that his actions had resulted in the death of 20 fellow astronauts seemed to have scared him. Following the incident, those of us who stayed for a few more days to finish attaching a few more thruster pods on the Titan sword before we too were ordered out of Outpost number 12. The moment that we got out of there was one of the happiest moments in my life, and I suddenly felt free from the constant voices. My first sleep cycle at Archangel Station after our return was the best sleep that I had my entire life, and due to the harassing voices, which was eventually labeled as Cosmic Anomaly number 6, deployment to Outpost number 12 was limited to a week. This resulted in the constant shifting of personnel and slow progress on the retrieval of the Titan sword, but I didn't care. I was glad that I was out of the outpost and lucky that I didn't get assigned there again. The rest of my stay in Archangel Station revolved around helping with the rather large docking port. Every work cycle that I spent there, I wondered why such a large docking port was needed. Eventually, though, I got my answer. A large arm was one day sent to the station, and it looked both grotesque and intriguing. Looking eerily too close to a human arm, it was extremely bloated and red. Covering it were various mechanical and electronic parts that were stabbed into the skin of the arm. Us junior officers were not exactly sure where the arm came from, but some of us had our theories. It was a common topic at the mess hall, and I remember the favorite theory involved experimentations with cosmic anomaly number 5. By the time that I left Archangel Station, the hand had been fully attached to the docking port built for it. Also completed was the recovery of the sword in orbit of Callisto. As the spacecraft I was on began its journey back to Earth, I couldn't help but stare at the small viewing port and look at the titanic sword floating next to the station and close to the large swollen hand now on it. Now I can't help but think about that again. I am set to return back to the station soon, and a lot has changed since I was last there. The station has had a lot of additions placed on and in it, and in its mission has changed from a simple research and symbolic station to one that was crucial to the defense of the solar system. Meanwhile, I had risen through the ranks to become a lieutenant colonel in the Act Division, which was now part of the Space Force. With the creation of this new branch, more funding and resources were provided to us to protect Earth and maintain the secret of cosmic threats away from the public. Yet now I've decided to post this before I leave and break the very secret that we have worked hard to protect. It is important that I do this now before I leave, because I fear that I won't have another opportunity to do so, and I doubt that the government will dare say a thing if we fail in our mission. We have found cosmic anomaly number 2, and it has its eyes on Earth. Our only hope of stopping it is using the carcass of an anomaly it had defeated before. Hey everyone, this is part 4 of Where the Bad Cops Go. If you missed the previous parts, I'll have them linked below in the description. New episodes of this series will be posted every Sunday until it's finished. Enjoy. Nick and I had to isolate ourselves. Not only because we had to stay up for 72 hours straight, but because we were scared we might spread what we had to others. Neither of us knew what this sore thing might do to us, but if 72 hours of being awake was what was necessary to keep us and the others from getting sick, we were gonna do it. Luckily, the weekend was just around the corner. A couple of us had Memorial Day off. Nick managed to get a hold of Reggie, who could cover his shift in return for Nick taking a shift on Independence Day. Fair deal. So, with a 3-day weekend, we had our work cut out for us. Caffeine was a given, but Nick also had to get some heavier stuff. The kind of thing that gets your heart racing to levels that it shouldn't. I'm not going to go into detail, but we needed a serious push to get past those last few hours. Remember, both of us had already been up for a full day when we first got exposed to this thing, so we were looking at almost 4 whole days and no preparation. We made the best of it. We played games, we ate takeout, we set new records on Nick's old Guitar Hero games that he dug out of storage. The plastic guitars were a bit stiff and sun-yellowed, but they worked just fine most of the time. The green button would get a bit stuck though. We went for walks, and we took turns taking cold showers. We had a spontaneous karaoke thing going on in the living room. Anything we could do to keep the ball rolling and our eyes open. Sometimes I would almost fall asleep standing up. Just leaning against a wall was bad enough. My knees would lock into place and my body would slump a little, and that's when Nick would shake me back to life. I had to get him a couple of times too. He once laid down face first on the couch and I immediately flipped it over, almost wrecking his coffee table as he came tumbling down. It was stupid, but we had to be stupid to make it through this. We had been up for over 40 hours and neither of us were making sense. We were out for a walk, hearing the frogs croak in the distance. The sun had just set, but we could still see the light peeking over the horizon. We tried to keep a good pace, but we could both feel it. We were slowing down. I had to keep us focused on something, so I brought up the first thing that came to mind. Your wife left you for a Salt Lake City stripper. Yup, Nick nodded. Had the biceps and the stomach thing and all of it. And they still together. What? No, he laughed. They were never together, but she tried, you know. I'm not following. She went for the guy. She called me up, said it was over, and went for the guy in this big romantic hullabaloo. And he blew her off. Well, he was gay, Nick shrugged. So it wasn't really like that. Nick looked up as if counting the stars. He sighed. The bags under his eyes looked darker than usual. I guess when you've seen the greener grass, everything else starts to look gross, right? Oh, you ain't gross, Nick. You're just another kind of grass, a sort of bluegrass, you know. Bluegrass, he chuckled. I like that. Bluegrass kind of guy. Those last few hours, we ended up watching reruns of Family Matters and chugging Four Loko. I had the Swedish fish flavor. Nick knew a guy with boxes of the stuff. It was vile, but we had to get over those last few hours. Nick was pacing back and forth, but was tired enough to almost fall over. Done, Nick slurred. I'm done. It's just over 2 hours. You can do 2 hours, I assured him. You can do it. I'm gonna go stick my head in the freezer. He did just as he said and stuck his head in the freezer. I was trying to keep up with the Winslows and their goofy adventures, but it was hard to pay attention. I had to fill in the blanks a lot and it didn't make a lot of sense. I barely registered the strange colors on screen as Steve Urkel. You know what we can do, Nick said. We can prep. What do you mean? We can make it comfortable. I'm gonna make my bed with all new stuff and you can crash out here. We can get like tea and ice water for when we wake up. And I get like scented candles and we put on whale song and we sleep like goddamn royalty, I added. Right? Yeah, he nodded, getting more enthusiastic. Yeah, you're right. So we got to work. Nick prepped his bed and I went to his car to get a couple of extra blankets for the couch. Problem was, those were really soft blankets and there was something about the backseat of his car that calmed me. Maybe the smell and feel of the synthetic leather. And so I crawled in the back seat. There was a cold wind blowing and so I closed the door. And in that silence I figured, oh, what's 1 hour? It would just be an hour. Would that really be so bad? And so I crashed in the back seat of his car. I was out for 14 hours. Nick got about 12. I woke up with a massive headache, but the ice water that Nick had prepped helped a little. I had made us a couple of sandwiches, and I thanked the past us for thinking ahead, as the two of us prepped for work. By all metrics, we ought to have been fine. 72 hours had passed. Nick drove me to work. My car was still back at my place. The conversation dulled as I chugged a full bottle of ice water, pouring the last few drops on my face. Nick looked like he had been trampled by some kind of depressed parade. Even his hair looked tired. We're not doing that again, I said. No, we're not, Nick agreed. So we're dropping this. I didn't answer. I had pulled Nick into some bad shit one time too many, and yeah, the ends justify the means. I was looking for this lost girl and I had stumbled upon the very thing that got her lost in the first place. Nick looked over at me and sighed. He took a moment to choose his words. "I get it," he finally said. "You wanted to help, you still do, but let's think about it. Let's be careful. If you want me to back off, you gotta promise me something, Nick." He rolled his eyes and then looked at me. I wasn't joking and he could tell. With a sigh, he nodded. "You gotta promise me that if you pick up any lead whatsoever on Adam's missing girl, you're telling me. You can call the shots, but there's gotta be shots to call. I'm not the only one here to serve and protect, right?" Nick tasted the words, throwing a glance in the rearview mirror. "All right," he said. "Deal." It took us a full work week to get back on our feet. My sleep schedule was a joke. One night I'd be in bed by 6, and another night I couldn't sleep at all. I would zone out at work, missing a word every now and then, much like I had missed the story beats on Family Matters. I would lag behind a bit trying to piece together the context and make it make sense. As I slowly got my routine back in order, May rolled into June. We started getting some proper heat. People were talking about a dry season with no hint of rain for a long time to come. And they weren't wrong. There wouldn't be a drop of water for 2.5 weeks. Midway through June, I was back on patrol duty. Charlie and Reggie were back to covering dispatch. Nick and I were on the same team courtesy of a thankfully short conversation with Sheriff Mason. I got the impression that the duck were backing off, like some kind of situation had sort of resolved itself seemingly. I was on my way home from a particularly rough shift. A couple of tourists have tried to shoplift from the local grocery store. After resisting arrest and racking up 2 counts of obstruction, they managed to fail themselves all the way into a felony charge. Hysterical people were a part of the job, but they were a shitty part of the job. But yeah, Tom's Cog doesn't have a lot of those. It was nice to have something regular to do for once. Coming home from that shift, I felt like things were getting back to normal. The first drops of rain spattered against the hood of my car as I pulled into the driveway of my house. The moment I stepped outside, it felt like bliss. The water was cooling, reassuring in a way. Like Mother Earth was whispering to me that things were gonna be okay. I just stopped for a second, put down my groceries, and basked in it. I found myself with my arms outstretched and my mouth wide open, just drinking it all in. I stood there for 35 minutes. I'm not gonna lie, that was worrisome. Up until that point, I'd been fine. Could that 1 hour of sore linger in your system that long? Could that be what caused it? I tried to rationalize it, thinking that I was overreacting. But in Tom's Cog, there's no such thing as overreacting. If anything, people tended to shove life-threatening bullshit under the rug way too fast, myself included. So just to make sure, I gave Nick a call explaining what I had done.
"Yeah, that's a symptom,"
he said.
"But I think some folks would just sort of stop at that, especially at the ass end of things."
So it could mean that's the last of it, I asked, like it's out of my system.
"Sure, yeah, it could. It's like when you get a bad cold. You get a runny nose, you get a headache. But that's just your body fighting it off. This is sort of like that."
So what do I do?
Keep an eye on it, and if it gets worse, we do something.
And do what? Nick was quiet. I looked back at my still-packed groceries, pacing restlessly. Do what, Nick?
Something. I don't know.
There were a couple of signs that things weren't okay, but they were harder to spot than you might imagine. It is only later when I looked back on this time that I realized these weren't really normal things. For example, automatic doors stopped working. They would close on me seemingly at random, as if they didn't register that I was really there. It got annoying after a while, and I even got my foot stuck at one point. Another thing was the water. No matter how hot I set the water to, it would end up going cold after a couple of seconds. I had to start taking really short showers. I called a plumber on 2 separate occasions, and both times they assured me that nothing was wrong. And then there were the birds. There were just a handful of them, but I would start to spot these bright red birds circling outside. They would flee and scatter at the sight of me, but I had never seen them before. They weren't native to the area. In and of themselves, these events would just be weird happenstances. But in the context of being exposed to something that I didn't understand, they had to be connected. And then there was that one morning. I got to work, used the bathroom, and as I washed my hands, I looked up to see my reflection. As I did, I watched it turn to ash. The skin looked like it sagged off my face and evaporated into dust, leaving a blackened, charcoal-like skull behind. Empty sockets, leaving a dead, empty stare. I tried to blink it away, but the image wouldn't disappear. I would turn my head, and as I did, the reflection would do the same, until decay caused the skull to detach and roll off the shoulder. As it did, the light flickered. There is a sound. I expected a thud, but it was something darker, more rumbling, like a drawn-out hello. I ran out, grabbed Nick by the arm, and got out of the station. I got a lot of weird looks that day, but I had started to get a bit of a reputation as a wild card anyway. At least I wasn't just a rookie. Nick pulled himself free, looking me up and down. It took him a couple of seconds to soften his expression. "It's getting worse, huh?" he asked. "Yeah, a lot. Look, the only one I can think of that would know something about this is Digman, but I hate that guy." "What?" I said. "Don't we have guys on surveillance?" "Oh, he's been gone for weeks. Suspected dead." "Dead?" I scoffed. "How are we not talking about this?" "It's not been confirmed or anything," Nick shrugged. "There's no body." "So what the hell do we do then?" Nick paced a little, adjusting his pink sunglasses. Looking back at the station, I could see that we had a bit of an audience. "We could get the doc," I suggested. "They study this, right?" You would go away," Nick said, shaking his head. "Permanently." Nick looked around as if expecting to see an answer in our immediate vicinity. Either that or he's having trouble keeping eye contact. "I don't know," Nick said. "There's this one thing that's sort of a cure-all kind of deal, but it's dumb, like real dumb, like actual dumb." "Nick, I gotta, what are you suggesting?" "Look, if you can hold on, I'm not suggesting anything else, and that you could, technically." "Come on, Nick, spit it out." He rolled his eyes and he threw out his arms in surrender. "You could do a year walk. Same as Digman. You would have to make it until New Year's and then a whole other year, but I've seen it done. It's an absolutely insane thing, but it can do anything." "When you say anything, what exactly do you mean?" Nick lowered his glasses and his voice. "It can literally bring the dead back to life. I bet my life that it could wipe away whatever shit you got in your system." "That's like chopping off your neck because you got a headache." "I'm just saying," Nick clarified. "There's always a backup plan." Things would escalate from there. The next time it rained, just a couple of days later, I lost 1.5 hours. I stepped outside and blacked out, waking up with a mouthful of rainwater. I started having nightmares. I would have no idea what about. I would just wake up with a cold sweat and a heart-pounding panic. I knew that it was bad, but I didn't know why. Sometimes there'd be bruises. And this one time, I woke up with an awful stomach cramp. I rushed to the bathroom thinking that I had indigestion when I tripped on the threshold. I landed stomach first on the bathroom tiles, and there was this fullness in my throat that just spurted out. I coughed up about half a dozen thin white strings. It was just the end of them. They were still attached to me though. I could feel them moving in my throat. I tried pulling them out, but the cramp sent this shockwave of pain through me, like the strands had roots in my gut. It felt like pulling them out might kill me. I got up off the floor and grabbed some nail clippers. Taking a single strand, I clipped it off. I got this intense pain in my chest, like my heart didn't know what to do. It felt like I had been stabbed or lost a tooth. There was this sharp, cutting pain, curling all the way from my throat down to the base of my spine. I just stood there, having these white strands hanging from the edge of my lips, like I had swallowed a cheap wig. There was only one option. I leaned my head back and slowly but surely swallowed. I spent the better part of an hour on that bathroom floor clutching my stomach. I thought about getting in the shower, but it would just be too cold. A single dead strand of white lay in the sink, stinking of chlorine and ammonia. It was so acidic that it discolored the ceramic with a tinge of blue. Later that night, I spent time going through Adam's notes. The man had been researching SOAR for some time, and although his notes made little sense, I figured there might be something in there that I had missed. Flipping page after page after page, I lulled myself into a semi-hypnotic state. Handwritten notes took ages to read. The notes were mostly focused on what he thought his daughter Elizabeth had been exposed to, but he was making an attempt to piece together info about the condition itself as well. And that was the scariest thing. It was never a disease or an infection. It was a condition. Every page all but confirmed that SOAR didn't destroy or introduce anything to the body. It escalated something that we already contained. It meant that whatever effect SOAR was triggering had a universal component already present in every single human. And according to Adam's notes, a handful of other creatures. Lions most notably, and certain kinds of fish. Falling asleep over the notebooks, I barely even read anymore. I just saw the pages flip, but there was something off. I was holding my head up with my left hand and checking my phone with my right. So how was I turning the page? As something cold retracted down my throat, it felt like swallowing a sort of tasteless, gelatinous yogurt, soft, boneless, and chunky. I fell out of my seat, tapping my body. My chest, my stomach, my head. I was okay, I wasn't even nauseous. But my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I could feel the strange weight in the pit of my stomach. Like I was full but without eating. Something was pressing against my organs, albeit ever so gently. I picked up the phone and called Nick. I ran into my bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. I looked normal. I was okay.
Yeah?
Nick answered. It's worse. It's so much worse.
I can be there in 15. Please. Are you gonna tell me what's...
I made this ungodly noise like I was bracing for a sneeze. But instead of a sneeze, I felt something rooted in my stomach shoot itself out of my throat. A white tentacle-like appendage slapped my phone out of my hand, sending it across the room. The reflection in the mirror was still standing as I fell to the floor. It was turning to ash and reaching its hands towards the appendage, almost like a greeting or an invitation. The two reached towards one another. I grabbed the thing coming out of my throat, but it was slippery. It felt like trying to strangle soap. I couldn't think straight. What was I even fighting? What was happening to me? Rushing towards the door, I caught a final glimpse of that reflection. It wasn't just a decaying me reaching out, there was something behind it, something impossibly dark, guiding its arm. Like a tutor teaching a pupil. It reminded me of how my mom had stood behind me at the shooting range when I was a teenager. A memory that up until that point had been nothing but positive. Crashing through the door, I stumbled through the living room, dragging the exposed white appendage behind me like an unfriendly dog on a leash. I tried leaning my head back and swallowing, forcing it back down my throat. But I just ended up gagging on air. It was straining itself, testing the roots in the pit of my stomach. It struggled, knocking over a couple of chairs as it twitched and slithered back and forth on the floor. I leaned back against the wall, bracing myself to pull. It was gonna hurt like hell, but I had no choice. And then I accidentally hit the light switch. All of a sudden, it retracted. It rolled back down my throat like a measuring tape, snapping hard enough that it tapped the tip of my nose going down. Kinda like the spaghetti scene in Lady and the Tramp. Another memory forever spoiled by that thing. I waited by the door in the light. I didn't know what to do. I was getting worse by the day, and there was no doubt in my mind that it was a sore thing anymore. There had been illustrations in Adam's notebooks, descriptions. Hell, I had seen the thing burst out of him that night in May, just before Nick and I killed him and set fire to his remains. I was screwed. There was no other way to say it. Going to the Duck would put everyone under investigation and I'd be gone. Staying with Nick could mean infecting others. When Nick pulled up, I walked out of the door and held up a hand. I had no idea what I was going to do or say, but I couldn't put him in danger again. Sore could spread at minimum contact, and there was no way that I could control it. I had no idea if a sneeze or a light touch could infect him. I had to keep my distance. "You okay?" he asked, stepping out of the car. You got anything?" I asked. "Any solutions?" "Not yet," he admitted, "but I think our best bet is to go hunting for Digman. They say he's gone, but he's a slippery shit. I don't think you could die if you wanted to." Yeah, I nodded. "Sounds good. You don't look okay. I mean, you got that heroin chic thing going on, but it's like more heroin than chic. I'll be good, Nick." And there was something about my tone that made him quiet down. We looked at one another in silence, considering the weight of our words. "It's real bad, huh?" "Uh-huh," I nodded. I looked down. Usually Nick could fix things. He could help me or I could help him. But this time my partner was as helpless as I was. "I think you should go, Nick. You can get sick." Screw that. I'm serious." He looked at me with arms crossed. I hadn't even noticed how he hadn't brought his trademark pink sunglasses. "What are you gonna do?" he asked. "I don't know," I shrugged. "But you gotta go. I can't control it." "Are you asking or telling me?" "I'm asking." He bit his lip, putting his hands at his side. He wanted to say something else, but he couldn't. He just gave me this look like he was asking me to reconsider. But I shook my head at him. He reluctantly got back in his car, and to his credit, he did as I asked and he laughed. I packed some things, mostly notebooks, some clothes, and cash. I locked the place up, got in my car, and drove. I couldn't stick around where I might hurt someone. At the end of the day, it was still about protect and serve. I tried to not look in the rearview mirror or the side mirrors. It felt like something was off, like they weren't really showing me what they should. There was that feeling that a tiny tilt would show me something that I didn't want to see. I would have to blink away things that weren't there. I would see shapes lining the side of the road. I'd feel something in my stomach twist and turn, as if commanded by something to act. I bit down hard, making sure that my teeth touched, and I put a hand in front of my mouth. But it didn't help for long. something tickled my nose instead. I remember thinking, no. That's all I was thinking. Streetlights were passing me by as I sped up. As I got further out of town, the streetlights made way for worse and worse dirt roads, leaving me into the spaces the Tomscog folks rarely went. I didn't really think about it. If that's what it was gonna be, then that's what it was gonna be. I would see humanoid shapes on the sides, darkened charcoal-like things, like the decay that I had seen looking back at me in the mirror. I could taste the sourness in my mouth as something struggled to be freed, and I could see things moving in the mirrors at the edge of my vision. I was doing something that it didn't want, and it was gonna let me know. It wanted to be around people. It wanted to meet others. Screw that. My car shook. Even with the seatbelt, I smacked my head against the roof of the car as I hit a rock. I almost lost my steering. I had to pull the handbrake, coming to a full stop. As my body shot forward, the car screeched to a halt. The second my body thumped against the seatbelt, little white strands shot out of my whole face. A tickle in my eyes and nose, something between my teeth, something running out of my ears like a bad earwax. The strands were almost 2 feet long now, scattered along the dashboard and moving independently of one another. Chlorine and ammonia. The smell was overwhelming, and for a moment I just sat there. I was afraid to move, thinking that I was a sudden jerk away from excruciating pain. I slowly pulled my head back and turned the car off. I just sat there with my face feeling like a leaking lemon. Was this the end stage? Was I about to lose my mind like Adam had? I looked up to see my reflection in the mirror. It hurt when I blinked. Little strands of white were moving my eyelashes, forcing me to blink over and over. I was expecting to see some horrific vision, but all I saw was myself. That was bad enough. Looking out into the dark, I could see silhouettes. Things as dark as decay moving closer. An army asking me to join. Something horrible and primal bringing out the worst in me, making it spill out like an overflowing bowl. I got out of the car and brought my flashlight. If light messed with these things, I'd mess with them all the way to my grave. I kept going down the broken dirt road by foot, desperate to get as far away as I could. I saw an old sign saying St. Gall, but I had no reference to what that might mean. There was no place on the map with that name. Maybe I was just distracted. I think I had heard it mentioned a couple of times. My light would land on things peeking out behind trees, things moving in the grass, distant whispers, interested parties taking note. A drop of blood ran from my nose. I was having trouble concentrating. I couldn't remember the name of the Winslows anymore. Did I even like Family Matters? Was that even a TV show? I fell to my knees. I couldn't keep up with thinking and moving at once, so I settled for thinking. I sat there on my knees, confounded and confused. I didn't even notice me turning the flashlight off and embracing the dark. I remember looking up and seeing something massive coming towards me. It didn't make a sound. It was just this presence, hollow and immense. When it finally spoke, it was as if spoken from behind a pane of glass, resonating, vibrating, trying to break through.
Hello.
I waved back, one finger at a time, like I was drumming on an invisible dashboard. "Hello," I said. "How are you?" It reached for me, and the things inside me reached back, like extending for a handshake. Someone welcoming an old friend. A promise of something horrible to come. I was just the broken shell of a snail waiting to be replaced. White strands raised themselves out of me. Something large adjusted itself, causing me to almost tip over. I tried pulling back, but there was no point. Not only was I exhausted, but I didn't understand what I was fighting against. But I remember laughing out loud, because despite knowing that I was about to die, that something would be torn from me, a thought crossed my mind. Carl Winslow was the dad on Family Matters, and in that moment I knew that this thing hadn't really won. Not yet. I could still think. I gathered whatever thoughts that I could muster and directed it into a tiny little movement. I twitched my thumb and the flashlight came back on. I had been holding it on the ground and it lit up my face like I was a kid telling a scary story. My face burned as it retreated into me, like a rabbit diving for its burrow. I was left with these chemical streaks across my face and this awful tickle in my throat. But for a brief moment, there was nothing there. It was just a nice summer night with frogs croaking in the distance, and the stars as bright as ever. "Miss, are you harmed?" I turned around to see somebody coming down the road. A nice-looking woman in a blue kaftan. She got closer and I wanted to keep my distance, but I physically couldn't. I can't imagine what I must have looked like. And yet this woman stopped about 6 feet away and sat down. She didn't seem the least bit bothered. You should go. Don't get sick." "I will not get sick," she said. "So that's not going to be a problem." "You could get sick," I mumbled. It could kill." No, she smiled. "That will not be an issue." She got up, scooched closer, and sat across from me. I tried to crawl back, but I couldn't get my arms to move. Sore was reaching into my brain, and I could feel it. I could hear the roots crackling as they physically wrapped around my brainstem. It wouldn't let me control myself again. "Did you come here to get help?" she asked. No, to get away. Don't sick." "Really, even now that is what you're thinking about?" Don't get... I couldn't finish my sentence. My head hung low as a weight fell on my neck. She put her hand on my chin and lifted me up to look at her. "Look, sweetie, I cannot tell a lie. So what I'm saying is not just comfort. It's what it's going to be, understand?" I tried to nod at her, but I couldn't. "This thing will not kill you. It will not control you. You will not infect anyone. I promise that's not gonna happen. It cannot happen." She wiped a tear from my eye with her thumb. My tear was a light blue. "You will feel better in the morning," she smiled. "Here, and try to remember the nice human lady with the kaftan who helped you, yes." She handed me a handkerchief, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and wandered off down the road. I closed my eyes, listening for her footsteps to disappear. I must have sat there for hours, all night. At the crack of dawn, I found myself still sitting in the middle of the road, clutching a handkerchief with a little blue sunflower on it. My legs had long since fallen asleep. I was hungry and tired, dirty as all hell. I could feel something dried on my face, leaving scabs and flakes to be picked off. I closed my eyes, testing myself to see if I was really okay. I thought about the show Family Matters again. It was a good measuring tape. Carl Winslow was the dad, Harriet was the mom, Laura and Eddie were the kids. And then I couldn't help but laugh. Urkel, I chuckled. Steve Urkel. It was all there, all the little bits and bobs from the back of my mind. I was really feeling better, like the lady had said I would. I don't know how she did it or why. I could still feel something inside, but I was in control. I could keep it down, I could breathe. And there was no pain, not even a threat of pain. "It won't kill me," I muttered. "It won't, in fact." I don't know how to describe it. I believed her, it felt true. I don't know how it could be, but it was. I was certain of it. I stumbled my way back to my car, closed the door, and put on my seatbelt. There were these splashes of blue across the dashboard from where the white strands had touched. I must have been hours, maybe minutes away from falling under the influence of that thing like Adam. But where he had lost his mind, I'd gotten a strange second wind. Maybe it was like Nick had said, that it was just the sickness taking its course. But I don't think that's it. I think what saved me that night was a chance encounter with a woman from St. Gall. The first thing I did was call him. It just took 2 signals. I'm better, I said. I think I'm gonna be okay.
You fixed it.
Well, kinda.
How?
There was a lady and... I looked down at the handkerchief with the blue sunflower and I laughed a little at myself. It was such a stupid moment, but it was so relieving. And Steve Urkel, I guess.
Are you drunk?
I'm sure as hell gonna be. I hung up and watched the Minnesota sun come up over the horizon. I had made it through the night. There might be more trouble down the road, but for now I was okay. But in that moment, I just had to sit for a while. Strange how I can't to this day picture what that lady really looked like. I know she was a nice lady with a blue caftan, but there's like no detail. There's nothing really there. It's just the words and what I remember feeling. But that don't make me any less thankful. October 4th, 2023. And this will be the 4th time that I've gone north for work, and I have to admit I'm more nervous about it than I've ever been years prior. I can't shake the feeling this voyage will be significant, but perhaps that is because I intend for it to be my last. My wife Lori and I are expecting a newborn girl soon, and this money will help us have a home for our new family. For this reason, I figure I should pass along all that I've learned to anyone else that might be also thinking of spending the next 6 to 8 weeks on a boat here. Some of these tips can likely be found on a million other posts just like this one, but it's good to be reminded, and it's even better if this is your first time. Here goes. And bring appropriate socks, ones that keep your feet warm and away from moisture. Okay, I cannot stress that enough. It's gonna be freezing and you don't want frostbite on your toes. And get plenty of them too. You're gonna be on your feet the majority of the time and you're gonna need to swap them out pretty often just to stay dry. If you can, get wool. And don't dress to impress. This is a dirty job. I remember one girl came in a pantsuit and hardly lasted a day and a half. Another time a guy brought his whole wardrobe. 4 suitcases. Ridiculous, really. Once you're out there to sea for 3 weeks or more, no one's gonna give a shit what you look like. If smoking tobacco, make sure to bring your own. And don't share. It's expensive up there and you ain't there to make friends. Remember, the day and night cycle is a little different in Alaska, and it's gonna take time for you to adjust. You're gonna have sleepless nights. You're gonna see things. I know I have. You're gonna meet a lot of idiots, but focus on the reason that you're there. It's a hard job working long hours and no contact with anyone in the world except your fellow deckhands. But it's worth it in the end for that paycheck. Find a captain that isn't a pushover and isn't trying to be the next Ahab. I know beggars can't be choosers, but there are literally tons of these jobs available and they hire anyone. I had a criminal record myself, and the ship that I found a home with only asked a few basic questions, like could I withstand being on my feet for 15 hours a day? See, I told you the socks were important. And did I understand that this job was a matter of life and death? So be open and honest about any record that you have. It can go a long way to impress the companies who are basically giving you free room and board. My buddy Eddie said that he prefers doing the processing plants on land but not me. Most of those end up eating at your pocketbook with hidden fees and wasting time waiting for work. I like to get it done and get back home. The high seas are the place for me. I expect that I'll likely earn a little over $20,000 while I'm here, so it's worth the headache. I can basically be off my main job for half the year and still make a decent living. Now, of course, these are just your basic tips. And I guess it's not really fair to only share those and not include the basic day-to-day affairs of life. Make sure you bring some Dramamine patches to help you cope with the seasickness. Be prepared to be bored for the most part. There are some days that you may catch absolutely nothing, and others where you'll think it's the motherlode. That's just the job. It's unpredictable. On average, there are over 400 boats that go up the Bering Sea this time of year, so finding one isn't that difficult. Just grab a list of names and a dartboard and you can't go wrong. October 6th. The Silver Beauty. That's the ship that I got with last year. My crew of misfits that I had to call family for 2 months. I managed to sign up with them again this year, and I'm glad to not be the greenhorn. There's 6 of us aboard the ship this time, myself included, and while most ships need about double that many men aboard, we are the exception to every rule. I sailed with them last year and I nearly lost my life. That's because of an incident that happened while I was working on the cages. We actually lost one of our deckhands, Unlucky Pete. A crane malfunctioned and smashed his leg because he had pushed me out of the way. We were over 32 miles from shore, so he bled out. I was now the one that got that moniker, told that if it hadn't been for Pete, I would be crushed entirely. We couldn't even offer the poor sap anything for the pain, so we just laid in his cot and cried in agony until he died. As I board the ship, I can still hear his moans near that wretched piece of machinery, blaming me for living. I made sure to ask for a job further from the crane this year. October 11th. We are miles away from civilization now. Only the darkness of the ocean to comfort my disquieted thoughts. In case you didn't know, just about any sailor worth his salt is a little superstitious, and Captain Reich Sullivan is definitely more that way than most. Sully decided to take us over toward the Russian border, where a lot of Opelio are nestled. But he did so near the beginning of the season, and that's when the storms are really rough. Still, we all knew that if we could catch a big load here, it might mean that we could take it easy during the colder weeks. Of course, that's honestly just wishful thinking, cause Sully works us twice as hard to get double the pay, with double the pain along the way. And ordinarily that's okay with me. But this time, something was different. It started around day 4 of the early harvest. It was my turn to cast the line and haul up the cages, and the sea just wasn't cooperating. If you've ever been out there when this sort of wave hits, then you know that one false move can crush your whole body. And that's if you're fortunate. So there I was, wearing my full rain gear alongside the greenhorn of the year named Kent, trying my best to stay standing as the boat tipped and rolled. Kent wasn't doing so well with the different shifts in the water, which made it double the work for me to watch him and to handle the line. What normally took about 15 minutes was taking longer also because of the storm. And then finally we managed to lug the cage up, only to find it wasn't just crabs that we had brought up from the water. A crash of lightning illuminated the sky behind the cage to give us a better look at it. But even in that brief moment, it was difficult to really say for sure what it was. Hank, a senior deckhand, unlatched the cage and let the crabs spill out so that we could get a better look at our discovery. It's a corpse. Kent realized once we had managed to pull it from the mash. I shined a flashlight over it to confirm what he said, surprised to find that most of the flesh was blackened but still relatively fresh, as though the body had been mummified. Captain on deck. Dylan, our navigator, declared as Sully came down to investigate our find. What is that thing? He muttered, disgusted by the sight and smell. The men mumbled different responses, no one daring to confess that we weren't sure what it was. Whatever it is, we should toss it back overboard, Hank decided. Steven, the crane operator who was basically Sully's second-in-command, had another idea. Well, hold on, Captain. Maybe this thing might be worth something. Could be a reward for the authorities, he suggested. Sullivan paused and rubbed the stubble on his chin for a moment as we all stared at the corpse, trying to decide what to do. Hey, did anybody notice that the storm died down? Kent asked nervously. I remember seeing that the sky was actually clear. It was extremely calm. Like suddenly, the sea had just gone quiet. Oh, it's a bad omen, Dylan muttered. Sully made the sign of the cross. Whatever it is, we'll take it with us back to Dutch Harbor next week. The Coast Guard can sort it out, he decided. So, what do we do with it until then? I remember asking. It felt weird considering that for the most part, our storage was designed for nothing besides rows and rows of sorted crab. He can't stay in the cage. I bet they'd eat up what little is left of him, Hank remarked as he gestured toward the haul that we had brought up with the corpse. We have a few crates in the hull. Take the thing down there and store it in one. Probably just some poor soul that came out here to try and make a few bucks like us. God rest his soul, Steven decided. Sully agreed with the decision and then ordered all the men back to work except me and Dylan, and we got to be the corpse haulers. Bring that stretcher over here, I told the greenhorn as I kept staring at the mangled body. Something about it unsettled me more than I cared to admit. And call it a sixth sense if you will, but I knew that the body couldn't possibly be from another fishing boat. It looked older, a lot more so than any of us could imagine. Dylan mirrored my fears as we moved the body over to the stretcher and he commented, This corpse is a lot older than just a few seasons back. Look at the decay. That's like what you would see over in Egypt. It's gotta be at least 100 years old or something. How is it even still down here? Maybe the algae and brine made it age faster, I suggested. It was a flimsy excuse, but I didn't want to focus on it any more than I needed to. The longer that we were here with it, the more uneasy I felt. We just need to go seal this thing up and get back to working, I told him. We made it to the hull and I found one of the crates, motioning Dylan to help me lift the corpse up into it. As we did, the whole ship tipped again and one of the bone fragments scraped against Dylan's leg. Instinctively, he cursed and dropped the corpse, the mangled remains collapsing into the box as I checked his wound. Best get Hank to check that out once we're in calmer waters, I suggested. We finished sealing up the crate and got back on deck. I remember thinking that it seemed like the sky was more gray than usual, as though the entire ocean was an ominous warning for us about our discovery. But I tried to push the superstitions aside and focus on the work. And Dylan couldn't though. The rest of the day he seemed dizzy and sidetracked. He kept favoring his left side and sometimes wound up accidentally letting a line out when he was supposed to be towing. I knew that he was going to hear an earful from Sully when we stopped for the day. What's gotten into you, man? I give you one simple job. Sully screamed as Dylan leaned over the edge and started to hurl. Turning the greenhorn around, I couldn't help but to notice a patch of his skin seemed to have blackened and bruised. The same area where he had been damaged by the corpse. Jesus Christ, you okay, boy? Sully asked. Dylan's eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed on the deck as the next wave crashed into us. I stood frigid in terror as he shook violently as though having a seizure. I wasn't sure, but it sounded like he was saying something, although it just sounded like gibberish. Still, the entire incident left me even more tense than before. What we had brought up from the waters was evil. Hank and Steven got him below deck to help him recover as I finished up the hall with Sully as he steered us toward a calmer segment of the strait that we were in. He was adamant that we weren't leaving the area despite Dylan's injury, but by nightfall it seemed like he was changing his tune because of how bad it looked. The entire leg might need amputation, Hank said as I checked on them. Dylan's leg was green and flesh was falling off in the area where the bone had scraped him. It made me sick to even look at it, but I did mention to the captain my concern about the corpse. That thing might have parasites or bacteria on it, I said after I explained how Dylan had gotten hurt. It was unnerving to see the greenhorn shake uncontrollably at random times, but perhaps more so when I realized that Hank seemed to have had no clue what could be ailing him. Never seen a sickness like this in the 32 years I've been at sea, he admitted. Nothing spreads that fast. Oh, can you perform a brief autopsy on the corpse? Maybe get a few samples, Sully suggested. All of us were hesitant to get anywhere near the body again, but we knew better than to argue with the captain. I went with Hank to the hull, grabbing a flashlight, and he got a crowbar to open the crate as we approached it. And this is the one, you're sure? Hank asked, checking it. I felt my heart drop. The seal had been broken, the metallic frame of the crate ripped off, and on the inside where the corpse had just been hours ago, I saw scratches and claw marks. They were fresh. Neither of us said anything as I moved the flashlight around the room cautiously. Suddenly, I no longer felt alone. Somewhere in these shadows, I was certain that we were being watched. And go tell the captain and get a gun, I told Hank as we slowly backed away from the crate toward the stairs. To my left, I heard something rattle. A piece of metal gently rolling across the tiles of the deck. My flashlight focused on it, and I saw what looked like little droplets of blood trailing toward the side of the boat. There was a small porthole here, and Hank and I both turned white as ghosts when we saw that the glass was broken, and something had pushed its way out of the window, leaving a mess of tattered flesh and bodily fluids behind. I went to the next porthole over and stuck my head out, looking up the side of the ship. I could just barely see indentations on the metal frame. Something had crawled its way toward the stern of our ship. And then I saw it. A dark silhouette dangling from the side of the frame, just near the crane. Carefully, I pulled my light up to see its lengthy, half-rotting body. It was larger than I had anticipated, as though once it had become reanimated, it had grown twice in size. A splash of waves hit me, causing me to drop the flashlight and cuss, and the creature turned its head toward me, revealing a ghastly, slanted face with elongated, torn ears, misshapen nostrils, and jagged teeth. The last thing that I heard as Hank pulled me back in was a shriek, like it was on the hunt. Hank didn't even need to ask what I had seen. My trembling features told the whole story. And then a long, blackened arm reached through the porthole with a snarl, its large claw-like fingers grabbing at the older man and slamming him toward the wall. I shouted his name as I heard the reanimated corpse scream, and Hank tried desperately to get away, the monster ripping his ear off as he was continuously being pulled through the distorted metal. I grabbed the crowbar that Hank had been holding and I swung at the arm, hitting it repeatedly until at last the creature let go. Snagging him up, Hank covered his ear and tried to push away tears as we ran up the storage stairs to the open deck. I didn't turn back to see if the creature was following us, instead racing across the wet floor to where I saw Kent preparing a line and shouted, "Get inside, now!" The younger man turned to us, his eyes widening as he looked at Hank and then saw something above us. A moment later, the creature had hurled its body across the frame of the boat right on top of Kent, pushing him down and pulling his chest open like it was little more than a stuffed animal. I covered my mouth, watching as Kent begged us to help, backing away toward the mess hall. Hank and I got inside and slammed the door shut. The last thing I saw was the poor man's pleading eyes before the monster ripped them out. Steven was there still monitoring Dylan, looking confused as he saw Hank's injury and then watched me push the table over to the door to jam it shut. "What the hell? What's going on out there?" he asked. Hank sat down next to the stove, using the fire to cauterize his wound as he winced in pain, and I did my best to explain what we had just experienced. "That corpse, it isn't dead. It's like a living monster or something. It just killed Kent," I told him, trying to catch my breath. Steven gave a skeptical look, but then heard the strange, guttural noises from outside and reconsidered. "What in God's green earth is that?" he whispered as he got a look at the creature while it finished off Kent. And behind us, we heard Dylan stir and cough, hardly able to form words as he was trying to talk. I heard a single, ragged word from his parched lips. "Drag it. We have to kill it with the sea. Sink the ship if we have to," he mumbled as he tried to sit. I got a good look at his sunken features and yellowing eyes, realizing that he was almost entirely infected by the beast now. "It's inside my head, Frank. Like a termite gnawing on a log, it's skittering around in my thoughts, telling me that I need to kill you, tear your flesh apart, and feast on your bones," Dylan said as I realized Steven had wisely already strapped the boy down. How long would those restraints hold was up for debate, I realized as he lurched forward and the entire thing shook. "I will infect you next, all of you. You have to kill me and destroy this ship before it gets back to port. It's the only way," he begged. I looked out the other porthole, realizing that we were in fact moving east again. "The captain made the call days ago, and he's pushing us to Dutch Harbor faster because of this mess," Steven admitted. "Where is the captain now?" Hank asked as he stood up after finishing his stitching on his ear. A little dry blood leaked down his cheek as we all heard the strange monster search for a way to reach us. "Up in the observatory. That thing will go after him next," Steven realized frantically as he moved to push the table out of the way again. "No, we can't leave. Out there we have nowhere to hide," I warned. Steven pushed me away and gave the empty deck a quick glance. "The two of you need to distract it. Topple the cages and make noise over on the starboard side. I'll make my way to the crane. With luck on our side, I can use that thing to knock the monster back to the waves," he decided. I gave Hank a look that told him I thought the plan was idiotic, but honestly, I couldn't think of anything better. All those tips and tricks I had managed to keep in my head for years felt useless against this living nightmare. On the count of 3, Steven instructed, ready to race across the deck. I don't remember those words or what happened next. I focused on my task of belting across to the crab pots. I thought of all the times I had been instructed how to properly prepare them, to make sure that none of the crabs made it out. All of that was now going out the window as I released the first and second latch, and then pushed barrels of raw meat onto the floor, anything to confuse the monster. Across the boat, I saw Steven hurrying up the crane ladder, shouting at us to make more noise as my eyes searched for any sign of the Draugr. It was standing there amid the bait, almost 8 feet tall. It looked healthier now, leaner and more strong than I cared to admit, but every bit as vicious. The boat rocked as it moved toward us, and I tried to think of what to do. "And get to the captain and steer us away from port," Hank ordered me, pushing me toward the observatory stairs, just as the creature made a long jump straight toward him. I didn't dare look back as I went to the captain's chambers, shouting for him to alter course, and then I saw his body, split in two against the wheel of the ship, his eyes still open in agony from what the Draugr had done to him. A second later, what was left of Hank smashed against the observation glass, his innards sliding down the side of the ship, as I stared down at the seemingly unstoppable beast that stood in the center of the deck. Hank's body fell through the shattered glass, tumbling over the foghorn, which made the creature surprisingly freeze in place as if confused by the noise. I decided to hold on it further, shouting at Steven to finish the job. The loud noise made the Draugr an easy target for our crane. My mind flashed back to Lucky Pete as the metallic hook slammed against the creature, flinging it up in the air and overboard. I stood there almost in a hypnotic trance for the longest, overcome with the trauma of all that had transpired. Hours later, we have sent the corpses of Kent, Hank, and Captain Sully to the watery grave. All that remains now is Dylan. We've sequestered him in the mess hall, and Steven and I are unsure if we can even get inside to risk finishing the job, because all we hear are the same strange noises the monster made. And Dylan is likely too far gone to be saved, but I will wait until daylight and then finish the job while Steven focuses on getting us home. He isn't as skilled as the captain navigating these waters, but I can't think of any other solution when we are alone out here. October 15th. I woke to the sound of something hitting the water, and I stepped out on deck to see Steven had just pushed the last of our supplies over the railing. "What is wrong with you? Are you mad?" I asked him, getting a good look at his complexion. He showed no signs of the corruption that had taken Dylan, but still clearly was losing sanity fast. "We don't know if any of this ain't cursed. Look at the sky, Frank. It's a clear day, but still as dark as the witching hour." I did as I was told, disturbed to realize that he was quite right. The sea was so calm that we couldn't even use the currents to push us, and the air was dead. All around the boat, I saw fish slowly dredging up from below. Nothing was able to stay alive as our little boat moved through the waves. "We're cursed. We must kill that thing now if we hope to even have a fighting chance," he insisted. I looked across the cage floor to the mess hall. It had been eerily quiet all night. Had the transformation finished? Was Dylan in some strange hibernation? There would only be one way to find out. I went to the nearby debris from the cages and got a splintered wooden pike, grasping it firmly as I told Steven that I would finish the job. "No matter what you do, move the boat south. If I get turned, I'll end myself before the infection has a chance to spread," I told him. I walked across the crate floor and flung the mess hall door open, half expecting Dylan to lunge at me when I did. To my surprise, he was instead sitting stiff on the cot across the way, his legs still shackled, but looking nothing like the boy that I had met days ago. His skin was now entirely a cool blackish blue, as though he had been bruised from head to toe, and sharp black veins ran from his neck to his creases around his blackish yellow eyes. His hair was a pale and crackly brown, and his teeth were like sharks, needling outward as he looked at me with a curious ferocity. He was at least twice as large too, the clothes hardly fitting, and leaving behind a bulging, bulk nightmare of a brute. I wasn't sure the shackling would even hold him long enough for me to get across the room and stake his heart.
"I can smell your fear,"
the boy spoke. His voice was raspy and his breath rancid. "It'll all be over soon. I can free you," I told him as I took a tentative step forward.
"Strange. I was about to give you the same offer."
"Let me end your suffering, Dylan. I owe you that much."
"Oh, the boy you knew is gone. I am a new form, not of the living nor the dead. I walk a path meant for gods, one where suffering is not a curse but a blessing."
He hissed. He stood up, the metallic clasp on his leg buckling easily.
"I could crush you like a twig where you stand, tear your flesh from starboard to port in a matter of minutes. And make sure you felt every single moment of it.
Dylan rasped. My heart beat faster as he proved his point by crossing the room in a mere second, towering over me now.
Do you know why you still live?
The Draugr asked. In response, I raised the stake up and slammed it against his chest, desperate to drive it in. It didn't even make the behemoth flinch. Instead, he pulled me up like a rag doll and took the stake out, pinning me to the side of the door with it, where I hung like a sinner from the crucifix.
Let me show you the wonders that I'm capable of.
Dylan told me as he stepped out toward the deck, his eyes focusing on the observatory. He raised his hands up just as I saw Stephen realize what was happening, and then the towering vampire transformed into a swarm of deadly flaming bats. Their endless shrieking swirled about toward Stephen, smashing into the glass like bullets and slicing at his flesh aimlessly. I heard him scream and beg for help, but there was no one left. It didn't stop for hours. I hung there against the hull of the Silver Beauty for a day, starving and waiting for Dylan to return and finish me off. He never did. Instead, the ship hit against rocks and I found myself at the mercy of rescue workers after 3 days, looking like a mad sailor who had lost their entire crew to the merciless ocean. When they let me down, they asked me if there were any other survivors, and I thought of Dylan. I had no idea where the Draugr had disappeared to, nor why he had allowed me to live, but I told them that I knew of no one. The official report I gave claimed that a severe storm had occurred and killed the others. I had grown ill and placed myself at the mercy of the waters, hoping to join them in the depths. I was told that I would be given mandatory therapy for 2 months, and small compensation for the voyage. Not anything close to what I had been promised, but honestly, I was thankful to just be alive. I called Lori from a hotel that night, blubbering like an idiot and apologizing. "Why do you keep saying that you're sorry? This isn't your fault," she kept saying. But I knew that it was different. And that beast now roamed free because of the incident on that boat. I had not acted quickly enough to kill the boy. Now all of them were dead because of me. October 17th. I received a letter telling me that a small service for the crew of the Silver Beauty would be held near the port of call where we had first left, and I left first thing at early light to pay my respects. The harbor was quite empty save for the office where I was told to wait. Inside, I saw that there were 6 coffins prepared, 1 for each of the crew. Wait, 6? I froze in place as one of the coffin lids opened and Dylan sat up and turned toward me. The others slowly did the same, revealing the undead crew members, some of whom looked like they were hardly a mangle of flesh and bones left. All of them under the thrall of their new master, who gestured toward the empty coffin on his left.
The sea waits for us, my child. We must return and tread across the dark waters to be found once more,
Dylan told me. My fingers touched the rim of the coffin as tears streamed down my face. "Please, I have a wife and a child on the way," I begged.
Who else do you think I would call to cast us off?
The Draugr responded. I heard the door to the viewing room close and my heart shuddered as I saw Lori standing there drenched in fresh blood. A hole was ruptured where our unborn had once been, and I realized that the monster had targeted her first to regain full strength, to ensure my cooperation as a dark servant. Lori crossed the threshold and offered me a knife to finish the task, and I wordlessly took it, using it on my wrists as I climbed into the coffin. "Do not fear, my love. This is only the beginning," she swore, her dead eyes smiling down at me. I shuddered and cried, fighting against the dark as the coffins closed shut. What came next was only the inescapable horrors of death. October 21st. A ship found my body 23 miles from Dutch Harbor. I am still shaking from the cold. They have questions about why I might attempt a funeral at sea for myself. I have promised that I will answer all of them once they gather the crew together. They are weary of trusting a man that they dredged up from the ocean, but I will show them the new path that has led me here. I will lead them to the dark depths that my master has prepared for us below.